Hey there! If you're watching this live, then you're what I like to call fashionably early, or more like fashionably on time, so thank you for being here. If you're not watching this live, feel free to skip a minute or so ahead. But if you're here, take this opportunity to slow down, maybe go brush your teeth, get a glass of water, say hi to everyone in the comments, or I could stop talking and let you enjoy some jazz. You still here? Good. I'm just checking. Before we begin, remember to keep it civil in the comments. Don't say anything you wouldn't want said to you. Thank you for being here, and enjoy the stream. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Apostate Aladdin, or Apostate Aladdin. Today I came across this video because I came across someone having a discussion about whether interfaith relationships or marriages are allowed in Islam or not. So to give some context, an interfaith marriage, what we mean by that is a Muslim person marrying a non-Muslim person. So there are some rules about that in Islam, and the generally applied and generally known rule is that a man can marry a Christian woman or a Jewish woman, people of the book as they're called in Islam, Ahlul Kitab, but it cannot happen the other way around. And when it comes to a man marrying a non-Muslim that doesn't fall into one of these two categories, it is not allowed. And this is just me relaying the common knowledge, basically. But I do want to hear it from a scholar. So I decided to react on stream because I was giving some commentary to a friend of mine as we were watching this. And I thought, I have too many thoughts to just dump on one person. So here we are on the stream. And I found it to be beneficial to listen carefully to what apologists and Dawah people say. So Shabir Ally, I don't know too much about him. I just know that his tone is usually pretty, I don't know, chill, if you want to call it that. He doesn't seem like a hateful person, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that he gets a pass to say whatever he wants. So this is not about disliking Shabir Ally in any way. This is more about listening to what he says and seeing if there's something to it, and seeing what are his words mean and what are in between the words. And that's why I wanted to call this Dissecting Apologetics. And it may be a series after all. We'll see. So without further ado, I hope that everyone who wanted to make it here today has already made it here. I've kind of pushed this back enough. So let's begin. I'm going to start. There are two videos here in this series of his. The first one is called, well, I think there are 4 videos, but we're just watching 2 today. The first one is called Interfaith Marriage. What does the Quran teach? Dr. Shabir Ally. Let's begin.
Dr. Shabir, so happy to have you on here.
Pleasure to be on.
Is the audio okay?
Dr. Shabir, the most common question that we get from viewers is about interfaith marriage. And it's not, a sort of intellectual discussion that they want to get into. It's their personal lives. So they're concerned, they want to marry someone, or somebody in their family wants to marry someone who is not a Muslim, perhaps, and they want to know what the Quran says about it. So I thought we could talk in this segment about, what does the Quran say about interfaith marriage, and go through some of the verses that are available to us and discuss what they actually mean. So let's start with the first verse, Dr. Shabir. So that's verse 5, the Quran, chapter 5, verse 5. So tell me what that verse says and how we can understand it.
Mm-hmm. So the verse basically says that the food of the people of the book is permissible for you Muslims. And at the same time, your food is permissible for them. And it is permissible for you to marry chaste, believing women. And also, but here is meant women of the believing Muslim community, and also permissible for you to marry are women, chaste women from among the people who have received the scripture before you, so long as you are paying the dower and you are taking them in decency in marriage, as opposed to like having paramours or girlfriends on the side.
So this verse seems to say that men can marry.
I just want to pause for a second and think about the word chaste. So I hadn't thought about this before. So chaste means abstaining from extramarital, from all sexual intercourse. I wonder, I don't think he clarifies this, but I wonder if he means those who have never had intercourse before. I'm not sure. I don't want to put any words in his mouth. But anyway, let's go back to the surah.
Marry women who are not Muslims then?
At least women who are from the Jewish and Christian communities. More generally, those who are classified as Ahlul Kitab, or people of the scripture. And most commonly, people of the scripture are understood by Muslims to be Jews and Christians.
So women are not included explicitly here then?
Yes, it doesn't say in the reverse that that women, Muslim women, could marry persons outside of the faith. This particular verse does not.
Okay. So do you want to say something about this verse or move on to the next verse?
Well, we can move on, but I just want to cap my last statement by saying that, in fact, there is no verse in the Quran that explicitly says that a woman could marry someone outside of the faith.
Okay.
I want you to take a mental note here. So he says there is no verse in the Quran that says it is allowed for a woman to marry someone outside of her faith. So Muslim women, or at least according to what the Quran explicitly says, it's only men. But he doesn't exactly leave it at that. And I want you, as you're listening to this, to try to write down, so what's his conclusion here, right? Like, just try to think about that. Take a mental note.
Okay, so let's move on then. Then there's the Quran, chapter 2, verse 221. What does that say?
So this one basically says that you should not.
She's kind of an
addressing
interviewer
men.
more
Much
than
of the
anything.
Quran is addressing men, to the extent that on one occasion it is reported that one of the wives of the Prophet, peace be upon him, our mother of the faith in the faith, Salma, said to him, all these verses are addressing men. Like, what's in there for us? And then there is a verse specifically in the 33rd chapter of the Quran which mentions men and women, men and women, men and women, repeatedly, to just make the point that when the Quran is speaking, it really means men and women. So we'll have to come back to that and think about the flip side of what we have just discussed about that permission given for men to marry outside of the faith. And one might ask, I think you're waiting to ask that too. Like,
that's coming up.
Okay, so yeah, so one would ask about the flip side, but we'll come to that. All right. So this particular verse actually mentions it both ways now. The one that you're asking about, the 221st verse of the second chapter, it says, "La tankihul mushrikati hatta yu'min." Do not, you men, marry polytheistic women until they believe. And it goes on to say that a servant girl.
Keep that in mind. So the verse says, let me read it right here. I want to pull it up on screen as well, but that's not easy to do at the moment. But he just said it. You cannot. It's talking about polytheist women, right? So here's the wording of the verse in Arabic. Of course, Quran.com is not being cooperative. It's like Allah knows. Allah is the admin at Quran.com. Here, it says, وَلَا تَنْكِحُوا الْمُشْرِكَاتِ حَتَّى يُؤْمِنَّ. Sorry, the font is really tiny. وَلَا تَنْكِحُوا الْمُشْرِكَاتِ حَتَّى يُؤْمِنَّ وَلَأَمَةٌ مُؤْمِنَةٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن مُشْرِكَةٍ. So he's going to talk about that part. So if you have a slave who's a Muslim, it's better than a polytheist free woman.
Who is a believer is better that a servant girl who is.
Don't call her servant girl, just say slave.
The believer is better for you to marry than to marry a polytheistic free woman. And then it mentions the flip side. وَلَا تُنْكِحُوا الْمُشْرِكِينَ حَتَّى يُؤْمِنُوا. And do not give your females in marriage to the polytheistic men until they believe. And again, it goes into the subtopic of that by saying that the believing a servant is better to marry
Slave.
than to marry a polytheistic man. And then it says, "Ulaika yad'una ila nar." So this gives the rationale for this religious ruling, that those are the people who are calling you towards the hellfire. Wallahu yad'ukum ila al-maghfirati.
Okay, I want to pause here for a second. So the rationale behind it is that, according to the verse, the polytheists are inviting you to hell, basically, right? Because they want you to be more like them, or you're going to be more inclined to not be a Muslim, or whatever reasoning there. I find this interesting because every time I've asked the question when it comes to what's the fate of polytheists and non-Muslims and just, non-believers and so on, who have heard about Islam, like the true message and everything, and they're not convinced. And I'm always told, like, the runaround answer is nobody knows what happens to them. Like, only God knows. But then in a lot of other instances, we can very easily say, yeah, polytheists will lead you to hell. Like, it's just literally said in the verse. Those are the people who will take you to hell with them. So that's very curious, how it's never a straight answer.
God, on the other hand, is calling you towards paradise and forgiveness. So the rationale here, obviously, is that if you marry a person outside of the faith, that person may call you away from the faith. In any case, might influence you, even if they're not calling you directly, away from your faith. And that could, from a religious point of view, mean that you end up in the wrong place in the life hereafter, which would be a disaster, the worst of all calamities for the serious Muslim believer.
So what is believing servant or slave or whatever is being used here in this verse? What does that mean?
She said servant or slave or whatever.
Here, there seems to be a distinction between the Muslim community that is referred to as the believing community and all else. So it does not mean that there are no believers outside of the Muslim community. Of course, there are people who believe in God. There are people who believe sincerely in their own faiths and so on. And we would call them believers. We would call them faithful people, people of faith. But the communities were divided in the time of the Quranic revelation, and communities were called by various names. So what was the Muslim community going to be called? Nowadays, of course, we call ourselves the Muslim community, but in those early days, they were just simply called the believers, Alladhina amanu, those who believe.
And they were distinguished from the people of the book. So
that's right.
Jews and Christians, right?
Yes.
So he's just saying believers is referring to Muslims, even though Christians and people of the book believe in something, but in the context of the Quran, believer means Muslims.
So basically the verse is saying, marry someone from within your believing community, and definitely do not marry a polytheist. I'm not saying that something is wrong with polytheists today. I'm just saying this is the way in which
the verse frames it.
Exactly, in the social and historical context in which.
Okay, so my ears perked up the first time that I heard this. So he was saying, yeah, you definitely can't marry a polytheist, right? And to be clear, Christians are not considered polytheists because even though they worship the Holy Trinity, they consider it to be one. And, in the Quran, it does refer to them as people of the book and so on. But what I wanted to comment on is how he said, of course, I don't mean that polytheists today are bad people or anything. It's just that this is what the verse says, is that we just can't marry them.
Something is wrong with, do not marry a polytheist. I'm not saying that something is wrong with polytheists today.
Today, and then he's going to say historical context.
Just saying this is the way in which
the verse frames it.
Exactly, in the social and historical context in which.
So here's the thing. We always excuse the Quran, or they excuse the Quran and Islam in general by saying, well, back then these groups were fighting, and in context, it's okay to say polytheists are bad, or they're going to hell and they're the worst of people, and mushrikeen and kafirun, they're the worst of people because of context. But it never says in the Quran, but in 2020 they're going to be normal people and you're going to have to get along with them because you're in their countries. That never comes up.
The Quran was revealed.
Okay, so then there's this last.
And yeah, basically it's like, I'm not saying that. I'm a nice person, but the Quran is saying that. And that's something that I always go back to. I genuinely don't think Muslims are bad people just by virtue of being Muslims, or by, I don't know what you would say the word, but by being Muslims. They're just forced to defend it. Like, I don't think this man would have been walking down the street thinking polytheists are bad people, except for he has to justify the verse, but he still kind of holds on to, but not right now. We're not talking about right now.
Last verse, which possibly refers to interfaith marriage, and it's from Surah 60, chapter 60, verse 10, and it talks about women who are refugees, it seems.
Yeah, so to understand that verse, let me first paint the background so we see the historical context. The Prophet Muhammad, on whom be peace.
So far we're just going through verses, and he's just giving some commentary here and there. There is no exact answer yet about this is exactly what is allowed in Islam and what isn't, but keep that in mind.
Was born in Mecca, and when he began preaching, he was met with persecution. And the few followers who dared to pick up his message and follow him were also persecuted. So it was not feasible for them to remain there and to have a viable faith as a community. They had to keep their faith a secret when they embraced the faith in order to escape persecution. So people started to migrate on the Prophet's direction. Some migrated to Abyssinia, and eventually a Christian king there in Abyssinia gave them refuge and protection. But that was not enough. The Prophet, peace be upon him, himself had to migrate, and he migrated to Medina, a city 400 kilometers to the north of his birthplace, Mecca. And there in the new community, many of his followers joined him, migrating away from Mecca, and many others came to rally to his call. But the enemy forces kept marching against his new city to attack and decimate the Muslims. So there were many battles in which the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his followers stood in defense against the invaders.
Okay, let's dissect that for a second. So I don't have enough off the top of my head historical knowledge to say he was actually oppressed or not, especially that most of the, if not all of the information we have is from Muslim sources saying that he was oppressed. But it sounds like he was like a lot of these prophets, according to these stories, were just very annoying to people practicing their own religion, not just annoying to the point of actually smashing idols. Like Muhammad, when he goes back to Mecca, he smashes idols, and you wonder why they kick the man out of their city. Like if you kick someone out of your city and the first thing they do when they come back is smash your mosques, how would you feel? And he said, the way that he phrased the wars here,
followers stood in defense against which the Prophet, peace be upon him, to attack and decimate the Muslims. So there were many battles in which the Prophet, peace be upon him,
there are many battles in which the Prophet
and his followers stood in defense.
Stood in defense. There are many battles where they stood in defense. You hear that? What about the other battles where they didn't stand in defense? Because they always bring up the defensive jihad or defensive fighting, but they never talk about the offensive one. So was every case pacifist and defensive? No, according to his own words, some of them. So why are we just skimming over it?
Against the invaders. So in that situation now, we have this verse that you refer to from the 60th chapter, which is referred to as Surah Al-Mumtahana, which means the women whose faith are to be tested.
All Muslim women's faith is to be tested these days. And they're going through it by their own admission. Unfortunately, like they come across things in Islam that they just can't wrap their heads around, and it's not because of a deficiency in their intelligence or anything. If you don't know the context to that, there is a hadith about women's intelligence being deficient in specific contexts, and so on is the excuse. But no, that's actually going on right now.
The background of this shows that, and the verse itself now shows that if the women migrate, so we already spoke about people migrating away from Mecca to escape that situation of persecution, and in any case to join the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his new founded community. So when the men migrated, there did not seem to be any problem, because men in those days were very independent, and they were to be reckoned with. But women were more protected in that traditional society. So if a woman was going to migrate, you can imagine the Meccans being up in arms over this, like, who's taking our females here, and they would want to exert control over their females. So when they did happen to migrate, escaping dangerous circumstances, fleeing for their lives, and arriving safely at Medina, now what was to be done? So that's one aspect of it. Now, another aspect is that in that traditional society, I've already mentioned in this segment the question of a dower being paid. Nowadays, when people get married, a lot of marriages are married.
So to give some context, this is not exactly too interesting, but it's about a verse, 60:10, where it's talking about if Muslim women refugees have left Mecca and they're coming to Medina, first of all, test their faith, as in ask them questions like, are you really a Muslim woman? And then it says, but God knows best if they're religious or not. And then if you found them mu'minat, basically Muslims or pious, do not return them to the disbelievers, because they're not compatible for each other, or they're not allowed. It's not halal for them to get together. And Dr. Shabir here is explaining the kind of the context behind it. Why wouldn't you send back a Muslim woman to a disbeliever town, where she just ran out from? And that all makes sense. But the point of the verse, or the relevance to this topic, is the part about they're not like they're not okay for each other. What's the word for it? They're not lawful for them, nor are the infidels lawful for believing women. So keep that in mind, because everything else he's saying makes sense, but it has nothing to do with the topic at hand.
Just out of love, and if there is an exchange of rings on both sides. The idea of a dower, which was very prevalent up until a couple of 100 years ago, where a woman was given a sort of financial asset to guarantee her financial ability within the marriage, especially in case the marriage should fail. This was in vogue. It was referred to as a dower. A man might give over a sizable piece of estate to his bride at the time of the marriage, and this becomes her own property. So now, in that traditional society, you can well imagine that, let's say, a man gave a sizable dower to a woman, and so they got married, and now the woman says, you know what, I'm a Muslim now, and I'm going to leave you. And she leaves and goes to join the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So this was a question that this passage is addressing. What should be done about that dower and about the marriage itself? So the Quran basically says, when these women come to you, to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, you're to ask them some basic questions. Are you pledging to stay away from all the transgressions that are known to be taboo in the Islamic faith? So you have to give up all of these evil things. Are you really pledging to do all of this? And if you see that yeah, they are sincere, they are really pledging to they're not just nominal Muslims, they sincerely want to be Muslims and follow the Islamic dictates, well then you retain them in your community, but you have to now send back the dower that they might have received in recent marriage. So that's to make sure that everything is done fairly and squarely. Now, this is remarkable because the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in that situation was a persecuted prophet, and he could have said, okay, so they're persecuting us, we have no responsibility towards them. But the Quran is saying, no, you do have a responsibility. You cannot just take your money and run. So if this woman who is leaving her community and her husband, she comes to the new community, if she had received a dower, especially a sizable one, then she should return the dower, and then she can be free to stay in the new community. So, and then
she can be returned back to her original husband.
Well, this is now the crucial part of the verse that relates to
there we go.
Our topic at hand. The verse says that these women are not lawful for them, meaning for the polytheists, nor are the polytheists lawful for the women. Now, does that mean lawful in marriage? Or does it mean that it is not right in the situation to send them back? After you have tested them and they have pledged and you see their sincerity as new Muslims, would it be right to send them back? Forget about marriage now. We're just talking about the justice of this.
Okay.
And so maybe this is one meaning, that it is not lawful. It is not permissible.
Maybe this is one meaning.
Maybe this is one meaning. We're just talking about the justice of this.
Okay.
And so maybe this is one meaning.
Sheikh, we're not here for maybes. Like, we want to know what the meaning is. So if the meaning of the words of Allah could be a maybe, how can we blame, how can Muslims blame the bad Muslims who misunderstood, when even the scholar right here is saying maybe?
That it is not lawful, it is not permissible. This would be a haram act. This would be like unthinkable for you to send them back in that situation, especially after they had escaped. Because after they had escaped and they have come to you, if you send them back, they're going to be subject to perhaps torture, but in any case to abuse, at least verbal abuse and most likely physical abuse as well. Because basically, when one left his community or her community in that circumstance, one would be seen as having betrayed the community.
Sound familiar?
So it would not be taken lightly. So it would have been a haram act to send them back to the community from which they had actually escaped. So maybe that's the meaning of the verse.
Maybe.
But let's say the meaning of the verse is that it's not permissible for them
One thing else that I want to point out. So first of all, there's the maybes, right? We're not here for maybes. We want answers. And this is one of the things where it's not vague enough that you can leave it at a maybe and be like, it's inconsequential. It doesn't matter. One thing that he's doing, I don't know if he's doing it intentionally or not, is this distraction. He's painting this scenario of maybe it has to do with this scenario where it absolutely makes no sense to send them back. I'm with you there. No one's saying send back polytheist, like women who left their tribe back to the same tribe who are definitely going to hurt them or probably going to hurt them. What does that have to do with the actual situation? He's trying to pose this hypothetical, this maybe, and say maybe that's what Allah meant, right? No, give us the meaning of the verse. And while he's talking, I'm looking up something right now, so I'll let you know what I find.
to go back to the marriage with it's not permissible. That's the meaning of the verse.
Maybe.
But let's say the meaning of the verse is that it's not permissible for them to go back to the marriage with their polytheistic husbands, seeing that they are now Muslims. Well, that would not be anything newly discovered after we have just discussed the verse from Surah Al-Baqarah, the second chapter of the Quran, the 221st verse, which says that neither men nor women from the believing Muslim community can marry a polytheistic person. So we're at the same conclusion here. And then what...
So I just want to reiterate that there's no maybe. Like I'm looking at one tafsir al-Muyassar. Here it says in Arabic, فالنساء المؤمنات لا يحل لهن أن يتزوجن الكفار. The mu'minas, like Muslim women, it is not allowed for them to marry kuffar, disbelievers. And it is not allowed for disbelievers to marry the mu'minat. It doesn't say anything here about only in this case. It just says in general, this is not allowed. So there's no maybe here.
Sticks out from this general discussion about marrying polytheists is the verse that we first discussed, the one from Surah 5, and which happens to be verse number 5 as well, that says that men, believing Muslim men, could marry women from among the people of the book.
So there's a differentiation here within the rules about men and women. So let's get back to that. I think in the next segment, where we're going to do part 2, we're going to talk a little bit more about the context of the verses and also how we can apply and understand it today. Thank you.
Okay, so far he hasn't really addressed anything except polytheists, which wasn't really a question. I mean, it's good to just get it out of the way. Yeah, Muslim men or women can't marry polytheists. That's just a given. And I'm not sure why he was going around the maybes, and I'm not sure why he hasn't yet addressed the other cases of Christians and Jews. But we'll get to that in the next video. And I just want to make it clear. So there are multiple issues with this, right? One of them is, how come there's a gender, what's like a gender imbalance here, inequality, that it can happen one way or not the other? And then there's the overarching issue of why can't people from different faiths get married? And if they can't, then, you know, how compatible are they? And what is the reason there are these incompatibilities? And we're going to get to that answer in the next video. So let's get to that next video. Let me see. Here's part 2.
Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Now let's continue our discussion of interfaith marriage. Last time we looked at the different verses of the Quran, what the Quran actually says about interfaith marriage. And now I want to look at how we understand those verses, and particularly how it concerns women, because it seems like women and men are given different rules within the Quran, especially as it pertains to marrying people like Jews and Christians. So can you explain, Dr. Shabir, why that differentiation seems to exist within the Quran?
Yeah, so just to sum up our previous discussion, Safiya, we looked at Surah 2, verse 221, which actually speaks both ways, both about men and women. Muslim men and Muslim women are not allowed to marry polytheists. Then we saw that in the 60th chapter of the Quran, the 10th verse, there was a specific mention about women, whether they could be returned to the polytheistic community after they had migrated under difficult circumstances. And the answer there was that once they have been shown to be sincere believers and they're pledging themselves to abide by the rules of the new community, then they should be allowed to stay and they should not be returned to the polytheists.
Again, I want to reiterate, I don't have a problem with that, like that situation or that concept. Of course, if the women left the refugees from a certain, well, from Mecca and a certain religion, of course they shouldn't be sent back because they will be harmed. That's not the thing that I have an issue with. The problem is the part of the verse that says because they're not lawful for each other, and that he's not exactly like he said that it could be because of the specific situation, but still hasn't gotten to the meat of the issue.
This verse may not have anything to do with marriage per se, but even if it refers to actual marriage.
See, it may not, but even if we're not here to deal with maybes.
Marriage, saying that the women are not permissible for the polytheists, it would not go differently from what we have already found from the.
Yeah, that's the issue where they go, let's presume this, but even if not, even if this God didn't mean this, God meant something else, it still doesn't contradict with other things that Allah said. So how do you determine what Allah actually meant to see? I'm going to show you the verse just so we have it on screen here. Let me do that. 1 second. I am killing some time. Let me see if I can find it in English as well. Here we go. Surah Al-Mumtahina. There we go. Okay. So here it is. Let me put it in full view. All right, let's read one translation. Honestly, I'm not sure which of these is the best, so I'm just going to go with this one right here. Picked all. O ye who believe, when believing women come onto you as fugitives, examine them. Examine them as in, like, ask them questions about Islam. Allah is best beware of their faith. If Allah is best aware of their faith. Like, you may or may not know if they're if they're actually being truthful, but Allah knows best. Okay, then if you know them for true believers, send them not back to the unbelievers. I'm making some reading mistakes, but the idea is like don't send them back to where they came from. They are not lawful for them, the disbelievers, nor are they, the disbelievers, lawful for them. And give them that which they have spent. So return the dowry. And it is no sin for you to marry such women when he has given them their dues, blah, blah, blah. And hold not to the ties of the disbelieving women, and ask them for that which ye have spent. So if your woman leaves Islam, then she has to return her mahr. Am I reading that correctly? Let me just scroll back to the Arabic version just to be sure. Let's see. Yeah. Yep. I believe that's how I'm understanding it correctly. And here's the thing, it's a tangent about the mahr, the dowry. When you get married to a woman and you give her a sum of money, and that is supposed to be financial security in case she gets divorced or something, she has a nest egg or something like that. And if you look at verse 434, I believe, and it said, it basically said that men are caretakers or maintainers or dominant over women because of what they spent on them. So it's kind of held against women, and at the same time, it's told as some kind of right. Women have the right to be provided for, which is not exactly a right, and we're going to get into that in other streams probably. But and here it's kind of like holding it against, holding it hostage, basically. If you disbelieve, I will divorce you, and you will give me back the money that I gave you, which could have been spent on even like the family or something else. But just keep that in mind. It's not something everybody thinks about for some reason. And in a similar sense, I don't remember the citation for this, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But there was a verse where the prophet, like Allah allegedly, sent down verses to tell the prophet's wives, like, if you want to leave, just leave, but you're going to go to hell. So, yeah, Muhammad was kind of using it a little bit to his advantage, a little bit. Or that's at least my opinion. Anyway, let's go back to the verse. And let them ask for that which they have spent. That is the judgment of Allah. He just blah, blah, blah. Okay. Now let's go back to the video. So everything good so far? I'm kind of peeking at the comments to see what's going on, but I haven't been paying that much attention to it. There we go. All right. Everybody see it okay? Okay, let's go back to watching.
Verse that we first discussed, Surah 2, verse 221, saying that Muslim men and women are not allowed to marry outside of the community. The verse that leads to your question is Surah 5, verse number 5, which says that Muslim men are allowed to marry women from among the people of the book. And we understand people of the book to most commonly be represented in the Jewish and Christian communities. So the question naturally arises from this: if men are allowed to marry from among the people of the book, why wouldn't Muslim women be allowed to marry, let's say, a Jewish or a Christian man? And I think that's your question.
Yes.
So,
and of course, the verse doesn't explicitly say that Muslim women are not allowed to marry Jews or Christians, right?
Yes, the verse doesn't say either way about whether
it doesn't
women
mention them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this is a silent. The answer to it is not given. Are Muslim women allowed to marry a Jewish or Christian man?
Something I just want to note. I just noticed in the comment, Astaghfirullah, don't blah 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 your way through scripture. I'm not sure if this person is making a joke or not, but I actually didn't think about that, and like I was just, that's how I read, and I was just saying blah, blah, blah. And I don't exactly take it back because I didn't intend to offend any Muslims who are listening. So if you can, bear through that offense, I'm not sure about the commenter or whoever's watching. Thank you for that. It's not intended to offend you, but at the same time, I'm not going to change how I talk just in case. It just came out. And that's a sign for the ex-Muslims, the new ex-Muslims in the crowd, or any doubting Muslims, that you get to a point where you don't fear this stuff anymore. Like, I used to be terrified, even after I left Islam, that if I disrespect God, even though I didn't believe in God, it was just this fear ingrained in me that if I just blaspheme or if I say anything accidentally like this, I'm still kind of scared that there might be consequences, because you're wired for that. And I think the commenter is kidding, but I just wanted to comment on this point anyway. You get to a point where this genuinely does not scare you. I mean, it really, really doesn't, to the point that I do it absentmindedly. Anyway, yeah.
And the answer is not given in the Quran. But Muslim scholars have tried to derive a ruling about this. Of course, their derived rulings, we should be aware, are derived not only from the Quran, but it's their whole life experience and their entire their upbringing, their social circumstances, and so on. So they give
societal context, right?
Exactly. They lived in a certain milieu in which certain things come naturally, certain things seem naturally abhorrent, and they give their interpretations based.
Give $1 to charity every time one of these apologists says historical or societal context, or the fallacy of presentism or something like that.
On all of these factors. Sometimes they're conscious of their the fact that they're sons of their own times, and sometimes they're not. And we have to be conscious that we ourselves are influenced by our own social contexts, and so too were they. And now the question for us is that are we bound by the previous social contexts, or can Muslims interpret their faith in a responsible manner with all of the scholarly apparatuses that ancient scholars have used, but also add to that the changing and modern context. So looking at the context and so on, we see that the Muslim scholars in the past have almost unanimously said that a Muslim woman is not.
Oh, to clarify, a couple of minutes ago when I said donate $1, I didn't mean to me. I meant to charity, because I was thinking people usually play like drinking games with that kind of thing. Every time you hear it, do a shot or something like that. So the more wholesome version is donate $1 or whatever you can to charity every time he says that.
allowed to marry outside of the faith, period. So the way they would read woman is not asked of, almost unanimously said that a Muslim woman is not allowed to marry outside of the faith, period.
So far, it's been almost unanimous.
The way they would reason it is that permission is given specifically to the men to marry from the people of the book, but such permission is not mentioned in the Quran for women, and therefore women have no such permission. One can come back at this and say, but wait, logically, things are generally said to be permissible unless there is a ruling against it. So if we don't have a ruling against a woman marrying a Jewish or Christian person, then that should basically by default be permissible. There is a specific ruling against a woman marrying a polytheistic person. And some people may want to say, well, wait a minute, Jews and Christians may be polytheists as well. But no, clearly.
Before he gets to that point, notice how he keeps saying some people say, some scholars say. He hasn't really weighed in on anything so far. So what we understood is unanimously, up until recently, or maybe unanimously, women are not allowed to marry Christians and Jews, right? He's just saying polytheists, that's clear in the Quran. But when you use the logic of if Quran doesn't say it's haram, therefore it is halal, there's so much that could be considered halal that Muslims will obviously look at, and any scholar would look at and be like, no, that's haram. Why? Because it goes against, the spirit of the verse, or the spirit of the Quran, or whatever, the spirit of the law of Sharia. So using that as an excuse, as in if Allah didn't explicitly say don't do it, correct me if I'm wrong, but did Allah ever say explicitly in the Quran that women should not be dating other women or marrying other women? Because I know that there's a verse about how the men of Lut used to kind of see other men as if they would see their woman or something like that, which means they would have intercourse with other men. But is there something about women and women? So according to this logic, thank you, we just figured something out, guys. It is okay to be a lesbian Muslima. So you can cite Shabir Ally, Dr. Shabir Ally. Of course, he doesn't say that, but I'm just saying if you apply the same logic that they use to get out of these tight spots, you can make a lot of other things allowed. So life hack.
Jews are monotheists, and there is some question from a Muslim standpoint about the monotheism that Christians espouse. But to be sure, Christians insist that there is only one God. And despite their belief in that monotheism that they profess, being different from the monotheism that Muslims profess. Nonetheless, in the Quran itself, Christians are not referred to by the title mushrikun, or polytheists. The term mushrikun, meaning polytheists in the Quran, almost invariably refers to the pagans of Arabia. Christians, by distinction, are referred to as people of the book. So to
a couple of things I want to say about that. So there are a lot of arguments in a lot of Muslim countries about whether Christians are polytheists or not. And this makes it very clear. The Quran talks about them as people of the book, but they do worship more than one entity that they consider one. It's pretty complicated, but the answer is pretty clear here. The other thing that I wanted to comment on, let me see.
Are, by distinction, are referred to as people of the book. Almost invariably refers to the pagans of Arabia.
Okay, that's what I was thinking about. So the word mushrikun, or polytheists, people who worship more than one god, in the Quran usually refers to a specific group of polytheists, or a specific flavor of polytheists, right? The ones in Arabia. So, for example, Hindus are polytheists, right? But Muhammad had no idea of them, did he? Or like the Quran isn't addressing them. And the Quran is supposed to be for all times and places. And then we apply an inaccurate description with a bunch of events that happened in historical societal context and a bunch of rulings for that context. Muslims would apply it, or Islam would have us apply it to people who don't exactly fit that definition, or who fit the definition but not the intended audience according to the Quran. Like, for example, the word kafir. I've spoken about this so many times before. kafir means disbeliever, but it comes from the origin of like the origin of it is an Arabic word that means that says kufr, which is hiding, and it means hiding the truth. Basically, a kafir is a denier who knows Islam is the truth and is hiding it. And the justification by these apologists and imams and sheikhs and scholars is, well, back then they knew, like they met the Prophet, and if you met the Prophet, you knew Islam was true, right? And anyone who denies is a liar, and they're doing it on purpose. And even if you believe all that, the fact that just God goes left and right talking about kuffar this and kuffar that and dogs and just insulting us all the time, someone bukmun ummi, deaf, mute, and blind, and we're supposed to just be like, oh, okay, so you meant those ones, but you were talking about, you're using the words that mean all of us, but you just meant those ones specifically. It's very cowardly, and it's very like, who are you fooling here? Yourself? Really?
Christians, by distinction, are referred to as people of the book. So too are Jews. It is a respectful title. And while the Quran says, لَقَدْ كَفَرَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ ثَالِثُ ثَلَاثَةٍ, those who say God is a third of three have disbelieved. And it's also said, لَقَدْ كَفَرَ الَّذِينَ قَالُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْمَسِيحُ ابْنُ مَرْيَمَ, those who say Jesus, the son of Mary, or those who say God is Jesus, son of Mary, have disbelieved. So even though the Quran is giving against some non-Christian beliefs at the time, the Quran nonetheless does not refer to the believing Christian community at that time by the title kuffar, as you know.
Okay, something very important to note here is at that time. So the Quran doesn't put timestamps on anything. If you're annoyed that my streams don't have timestamps, sometimes I really try to actually sit through and listen to myself and put timestamps, but I can't always. But the fact that Allah doesn't really have any context in terms of what came when and what applies till what date and expires when, Allah's contradicting himself. He just mentioned it. He's saying that Allah says, or the Quran says, if someone says Jesus is God or is the Son of God, then he's a kafir. And if someone says God is three, the Holy Trinity, then he's a kafir. But they're also people of the book that you can marry. And I think it has more to do with political motivations and political gains than anything. It just has to do with what's convenient at that time that Muhammad said it. I don't know if he had the coherence to actually sit down and plan it out and be like, in the future, they're going to be okay and they're going to be kuffar at this time and not at this time. So I just want to listen to what he said again and listen to his words carefully.
Community does not refer to Christian beliefs at the time. The Quran say Jesus, the son of Mary, or those who say God is Jesus, son of Mary, have disbelieved. So even though the Quran is giving against some non-Christian beliefs at the time, the Quran nonetheless does not refer to the believing Christian community at that time, by the title kuffar, as you know, the kuffar refers to the rejectors of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as the title, and it does not refer to them as mushrikun, as
So what's the conclusion? Was the Quran wrong to refer to them as kuffar?
Polytheists. So when the Quran is saying do not marry the polytheists, it's the idea of Jews and Christians is not really in vogue here. It's the target is the polytheists of Arabia. So
let's get back to the question of women now. So why weren't?
Thank you.
What reasoning could there be for women not being included within that verse?
So logically, as I've said, there is no reason for thinking that the verse means that women cannot marry outside of the faith, meaning that women cannot marry Jews and Christians in particular. There's nothing in the verse that says that. And there is only an argument from silence that has been advanced by our classical Muslim scholars who have said, okay, the verse says that men can marry Jews and Christians, but it does not say that women could marry, and therefore women cannot marry. So they have drawn an inference from the silence of the Quran, but that inference is probably shaped more by their cultural and social circumstances.
Okay. Well, 1 second, because I the irony, guys. Okay. And I'm sorry, I don't mean this to be like mocking his every word. I just want to talk about the irony of this. He says Let's hear him again.
So they have drawn an inference from the silence of the Quran.
They have drawn an inference from the silence of the Quran. They meaning all the classical scholars for, generations and generations. So all of them who could have been wrong, if he's supporting the opposite view, all of them who were wrong were drawing it from the silence of the Quran. Can someone please read the 3 words that are in the background of his video? 4 words, sorry. Let the Quran speak. Except when it's silent, then you can wrongly infer something that has to do with your culture and social context and blah, 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 and bias. Then speak, ya akhi, Quran, speak. Go ahead.
But that inference is probably shaped more by their cultural and social circumstances, the milieu in which they lived. And we can understand why that social milieu prevailed.
So for 1400 years, however many long, the majority of Muslims, according to him, were influenced by culture rather than the Quran when it came to this, for example, right? So Allah failed for 13 plus 100 years, failed at getting us to understand because of the silence that he had in that verse. Let the Quran speak, Yallah, speak. What do we do? Allah left it silent. So are we supposed to say, are we supposed to believe that the Quran failed to, or Islam failed to fix whatever this cultural, social deficiency that he is citing as the cause of this for 1400 years? It failed to fix it up until, secular countries started asking questions?
In ancient societies, women did not have the kinds of power that they have now, and they did not have the state protections that they have now. So we can well imagine that up to a few hundred years ago, if a Muslim woman married outside of the faith, let's say a Muslim woman were married to a Christian man, and she may find it difficult to stand her ground and retain her faith in those circumstances. And now, in many traditional societies, religion was said to follow from the religion of the father. So if
before he gets to that point, he's saying before, women used to be, let's not misquote him. Let's hear what he said exactly.
Faith, let's say a Muslim woman were married to a Christian up to a few hundred now, and they did not have the state protections that they have now.
What's the word?
You prevailed. In ancient societies, women did not have the kinds of power that they have now.
And that's not in ancient societies. That's in the Muslim world up until not too long ago. I mean, I got to give credit to the women there who've been working really hard to get rights. But a lot of these movements as well are not necessarily inspired by the movements outside that have succeeded, but they're empowered by these movements outside of the Muslim world that succeeded. So what is he citing here? This progress is not due to Islam. Islam was holding back all this progress, and thanks to other institutions, thanks to other efforts, women have more rights. So it's kind of a own goal.
And they did not have the state protections that they have now. So we can well imagine that up to a few hundred years ago, if a Muslim woman married outside of the faith, let's say a Muslim woman were married to a Christian man, and she may find it difficult to stand her ground and retain her faith in those circumstances. And now, in many traditional societies, religion was said to follow from the religion of the father. So if they had a child, then naturally the child will be assumed to be of the religion of his or her father.
You want to know why there are 1 point whatever many billion Muslims in the world? That is exactly why. That is exactly why. Because the child is presumed to be the religion of his father. Thank you, Ya Sheikh. Thank you. Speaking facts today, just spitting facts right and left, no cap except mine. So that's why we're always presumed to be Muslim, because we're born Muslim. And if you decide, actually, this isn't for me, whether you actually got into it or not, you're seen as some kind of traitor. It doesn't make any sense. But the point he's trying to make here, and I'm going to let him speak, I'm going to let him say it, is that because the women was so under-empowered, because of all these ancient societies, as he put it, including Islam, by the way, Islamic societies, including up until now, they couldn't have a say in their kids' religion, and they couldn't have a say in how they practiced their religion. So that's why it wouldn't have worked that way.
So it is viewed in the Muslim context. A child born in a marriage takes on naturally the religion of the father. So when a Muslim man is permitted to marry a Jewish or a Christian lady, it is presumed in the Islamic context that any child born of that marriage will be a Muslim, following from the religion of the father. And while it is presumed that the Muslim man is obligated to assist his wife in carrying out all of her religious duties and practices, even though she be a Jew or a Christian, to the extent that he might need to drive her to church, and that's fine. He's not doing anything Islamic. He's actually doing the Islamic thing by assisting his wife to retain her religious consciousness and her practices.
Really?
Now, Muslim scholars could not see the same guarantee being offered from the other direction because...
Pause here. So he's saying Muslim men are obliged by Islam to take, for example, if his wife is a Christian, to support her in her religion, to support her practicing her religion, not only by allowing her, but actually supporting her, like going out of his way to drive her to church, for example. He glosses over it. I want a citation about that. I'm not saying it's false, but I would love to see a citation. Because if it just comes from some vague, you got to treat your wife fairly, and that by inference includes this and that, then you're counting on the husband being a good person and not blocked by religion to think, because they could very easily think, why am I assisting someone in going to do something haram, right? Like I'm helping her go to hell. So which one is it? I'm not saying it's a bad thing to be supportive of your Christian wife and take her to church. I'm saying please cite it. Don't just use it as some kind of PR, and tell me the justification behind it, and tell me how other people won't accidentally misunderstand that part too.
Muslim scholars insisted, our faith says that a Muslim man has to ensure the religiosity of his wife, though she be of a different religion. But we cannot guarantee that same privilege will be offered to a Muslim woman if she were to marry a person outside of the faith.
Mm-hmm. So given all that you're saying, then can't someone, an observer say, well, then in that sense, that verse makes sense, that it doesn't include women? Because women probably were not marrying outside of the faith at the time of the Prophet.
Yes, that would be an interesting point to make. And of course, it wouldn't change the logic of what I said already, that if the verse does not by itself prohibit women from marrying outside of the faith, we can say that there is nothing specifically in the verse itself. Now, we might ask about the common sense of the issue as well. And I think this...
Okay, so to reiterate, the point that he was making is a Muslim man is forced to by Islam, or he's encouraged to, or he didn't really say the word forced to, but he's supposed to support his Christian wife, for example, by taking her to church and so on. But you cannot guarantee, or as he put it, the scholars couldn't see that there was a guarantee that the Christian man would do the same thing for a Muslim woman. Except I really don't think that's a guarantee in any sense of the word. And even when something is religiously advised or whatever, like for example, the wife beating, right? It's always told to us that no, Allah instructs to or Muhammad instructs to do it softly, gently, and not on the face, because whatever, I'm going to get into that in another stream. That, first of all, is not mentioned in the Quran, but secondly, we're counting on men abiding to Islam in this specific way, and if they deviate just a little bit, it's abuse. I mean, this is already abuse, but if they deviate just a little bit more, it's more abuse. And here he presents it as if Islam is making it the best case scenario where the husband is going to be supportive of his Christian wife, when we know for a fact that is likely not going to happen, or there's a huge chance that this won't happen. So you can't use it as some kind of justification that we have this rule that he never cited, but they don't. Therefore, we can't mix the other way around.
This is a very important point. Whereas we have said that the verse permits men to marry Jewish and Christian women, some Muslim scholars have said that this applies only where Islam is the prevailing culture.
Say that again?
Have said Jewish and Christian women. Some Muslim scholars have said that this applies only where Islam is the prevailing culture. But if you go to a different situation where it seems that the children born in a marriage might more likely follow the religion of the mother, who happens to be a Jewish or Christian lady, then from the Islamic point of view, this is objectionable because we are losing a progeny to another faith. And
did you hear that? It's so subtle yet so insidious. And this is why I have trouble when I have people in my comments saying, well, Islam is about, having as many Muslims as possible and they're going to take over the world and stuff. I'm like, no, that's not how Muslims think. It really isn't how at least most Muslims are just going about their life. And then he just comes out and says, just so casually, yeah, we're going to lose numbers if we let that happen. Like it's some kind of strategy game to take over the world. What are you saying, ya Sheikh?
Which might more likely follow the prevailing
Let's
culture.
listen to it from the beginning. He's saying if Islam is the prevailing culture.
Have said that this applies only where Islam is the prevailing culture. But if you go to a different situation,
only where Islam is the prevailing culture, aka the worst place to live, aka all the times that when you see Sharia implemented, they say, well, that's not real Islam, that's not exactly perfect Sharia, then when is it? And it disgusts me when I see people enjoying life in the West. And they're talking about how, yeah, if Islam was the prevailing, why is there a different rule? And again, this is why it is so difficult to tell people to stop commenting things like, well, they're just all lying to you and taqiyya this and taqiyya that. And I keep saying, no, they're not. They're actually not lying to you. But then the sheikh comes out and says this kind of language. Yeah.
Situation where it seems that the children born in a marriage might more likely follow the religion of the mother, who happens to be a Jewish or Christian lady, then from the Islamic point of view, this is objectionable because we are losing a progeny to another faith. And so they rule that this is impermissible. And in fact, it is noted that Umar radiallahu anh, the second caliph of Islam, had noticed that a lot of Muslim men were marrying outside of the religion. And he said that this has got to stop because if men continue like this, who's going to marry the Muslim women?
That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
And so he deemed it, he objected to that. And following his ruling, some have said that it is makruh, Muslim scholars.
Okay, all I've been getting from the sheikh is some scholar said, some scholar said, some scholar said. And this is really, again, one of those like moments where my ears perk up. So he said that Umar had an objection because he was seeing a lot of Muslim men were marrying non-Muslim women, and he objected to it. And that reminds me, Umar has a huge say in what goes in Islam. Like sometimes he recites verses that people put in because he said them. He would tell his prophet to, like his wife Sauda would go out at night and use the washroom, like out in, I guess, in the desert. And Umar would actually watch her and he would say, I've seen you. And he would tell the prophet, cover up your wives. Like Umar had so much control over Muhammad in some ways. And he was such an aggressive, angry man. I'm not sure why people idolize him at all. At all. And here he's demonstrating how at some point Umar saw, he was the Khalifa, and he saw, well, the men are marrying too many non-Muslim women. Who's going to marry the Muslim women? I'm going to change the ruling. So did he change the ruling of Allah or the ruling of Muhammad, who was not really a prophet and he's just, making up stuff that is the best for his community or for his political interests or for his tribe's kind of, not necessarily the best for the community, but the best to kind of strengthen the community in terms of becoming a political movement, becoming a good army. That's why there's a lot of promises of heaven if you die in battle and things like that. It's just funny to me that he just plainly admitted that Umar decided in this situation, now you need to marry more Muslim women. So screw what God said, because we don't even know what God said. And some scholars are saying because of that, then yeah, Muslim men are not even allowed to marry Christian women. What did Allah say? Let the Quran speak. Let the Quran speak. What is the Quran saying? The Quran is saying Umar decided at some point.
to this day, following that ruling, say that it is makruh or objectionable for a Muslim man to marry a Jewish or Christian woman, even though the explicit permission was there in the Quran. But they will give justifications for that. But the justification of Omar was that we can't continue like this.
And I forgot, wasn't it that I was always told that one justification for marrying more than one wife is there were more women than men because men died in war, and the women from the other side also died in war, and this and that. So why didn't Omar just add them on to the I don't understand here. And I don't understand how some scholars can override the word of Allah. He said it here, even though the verse says it's allowed.
But the explicit permission for a Muslim man to marry a Jewish or objectionable for a Muslim man to marry a Jewish or Christian woman, even though the explicit permission was there in the Quran.
So even though the explicit permission was there in the Quran, how did some scholars, as he put it, some scholars conclude that in this situation it's different? So that is proof right there that it doesn't matter what Allah said. Aside from the fact that we can't even decipher what Allah said half the time. Well, not half, but however much the proportion is, but very often. It just demonstrates that you can pull whatever you want out of Islam. You can make it fit whatever you want. So when you say that, no, the people who are applying it this way, it's because they're bad people. No, it's because there's room for interpretation, to the point that someone can go against the word of Allah explicitly, as he mentioned, and still be considered a scholar of Islam and still be cited by him.
But they will give justifications for that. But the justification of Omar was that we can't continue like this. And now, in a modern context, we can see that many things have changed. One is that women have actually been given a lot of power and a lot of state protection. So often if there is a dissolution of a marriage, the children will actually go into the care of the mother. And the mother will then have a large influence on the upbringing of the children. Moreover, if a woman is married even to a non-Muslim man, she is protected by state rules to make sure that she cannot be forced away from her marriage, and she has away from her religion, and she has every full right to exercise her religious conscience within a marriage. And
I want to comment on this for a second. So I'm not familiar with a rule that says that the woman would get the children if the marriage is broken or whatever. I'm not familiar with that coming from Islam at all. It could be there, it could not be there. But what I want to focus on is he's posing it as if in reality this will ever be upheld. Like he's saying there are protections for women to practice their own religion. I bet you it's happened already. It's happened already. If a woman leaves Islam, be it to join Christianity, or she's already a Christian, or there's some dispute and the husband is like, okay, I thought I could do this with a Christian. I can't anymore. I want the kids. He gets the kids. Like there's no doubt about it. In Muslim countries, that's how it works. And to say that that's because the Muslim countries are imperfect, then Allah set up a system that all it takes is just one little imperfection in one human for it to be abusive. That's an imperfect system. If all it takes is one man just being slightly bad or whatever it may be, or the system just enabling that, it's almost like Muhammad is setting up misogyny to be, aside from what he explicitly said, which is misogyny, he's setting up more abuse to happen. And then we're surprised and we say, well, that's not real Islam.
And men, are not given the kind of free hand that they had in traditional times. So that changes the dynamic a little bit. I mean, there are still things that go on behind locked doors that the state may not know about.
Behind open
Women
doors.
may still be coerced into situations and so on.
I don't know if everyone here is aware, but this happens openly, that women are harmed and mothers have their kids taken away from them. This all happens very, very openly. It's not behind closed doors. Not only that, more often than not, the state won't intervene in family matters, as they call it. Like if the husband is beating his wife or the children or whatever it may be, they don't intervene because those are family matters. So it's not a rare case of closed doors. The policy is closed doors.
But there is definitely a change in this regard. So with these changes in mind, one would naturally ask, why should the woman be permitted to marry outside of the faith? But I wanted to say something about the practical side of
there's
this.
nothing natural. Is it me and my inattentiveness, or did we not arrive naturally at the questions, why shouldn't... Say that again.
Side of the faith. Naturally ask, why should the woman be permitted to marry out?
Did he say should or shouldn't?
One would naturally ask, why should the woman be permitted to marry outside of the faith?
I'm very confused because he's all over the place. So now he's talking about how, even though it is permissible for a man to marry a Christian woman, or I'm just going to say Christian from now on, but I also mean Jewish. Even if that is permissible, sometimes Omar decided it wasn't, and some scholars think it's not. And because of all the mumbo jumbo that he said about a bunch of different things, it is natural to ask, like to ask, why should women be allowed to marry a non-Muslim? Is it just me, or that was not natural at all to ask? If anything, it's just confusing us even more. So he's trying to pose it as, since the woman in Islamic law, apparently, according to him, without citation, has rights like taking the kids when there's a divorce or when there's issues, that means that the kids will grow up not Muslims, and that's going to reduce the number of Muslims, as he put it, which is a political goal. Because of that, we need to ask, why should a Christian or a Muslim woman be allowed to... I'm really confused.
But I wanted to say something about the practical side of this. Khalid Abu al-Fadl is a known Muslim scholar who has been well trained in traditional Islamic sciences, and at the same time he lives in the modern context. He lives in the United States of America, and he has written many books and articles. Many of his articles are found on his website, scholarofthehouse.com. And there he's addressed this question about women marrying outside of the faith. And he says that after 20 or 30 years of being with the Muslim community and seeing the results of interfaith marriages, he's not recommending it from the practical point of view. In fact, he thinks...
I don't remember asking for a recommendation, right? This isn't Yelp. I think we want to understand what is applying the Quranic rulings. So just get to the point. It's 13 and a half minutes in, and he said the Quranic ruling explicitly said the men are allowed. It doesn't explicitly say that the women aren't allowed, but that's not implicit either. But sometimes we can go against the explicit word of the Quran. That's all he said so far. And this other sheikh has a recommendation because he lives in the US. Let's hear it out.
Thinks that it should get from the seeing the results of interfaith marriages. He's not recommending it from the practical point of view. In fact, he thinks that it should be dissuaded. People should be dissuaded from doing this, because what he finds is that when children grow up in these interfaith marriages, they are not moored in either the Muslim faith or the other faith. They try to steer a neutral course between mom and dad.
Again, I want to make this very clear. He's talking about the observations of another sheikh who lived and witnessed a lot of these interfaith marriages. And that sheikh is dissuading them, even though Allah allowed them. So keep that in mind. But also, he's not talking about the official ruling.
And the two religions that are represented in the marriage, and they find themselves to be agnostic. They don't know what to believe, and this is not good for the faith of the coming generation.
You know why? When people are raised in multi-faith marriages or interfaith marriages, they are more likely to be agnostic, because from the moment they understand what religion is, if they're taught about both, they are now exposed to this idea. I trust both of those people, and they both told me something about their version of reality, and they're both going to each other's hells. I mean, unless they're gonna, mental gymnastics their way out of that one, of course the kid is gonna grow up and be like, wait a second, this is all bull. That's what happens when you teach kids about multiple religions. But if you indoctrinate them into your one religion, they're not gonna question till it's too late, maybe never at all. But they're gonna go through formative years and just build the world around this little so-called fact that you fed them. But when you feed them two conflicting facts, then they start thinking. So yeah, his friend is right, or the scholar is right. I bet that in these marriages, they're going to result in more thinking skeptical children or, you know, people going to hell.
So he dissuades people from marrying outside of three, both men and women. And here we should express the fairness, not by saying that, okay, because men are permitted to marry outside, therefore women should also be permitted. Probably we should express the fairness by saying that since we see in our present context that the results of the interfaith marriages are such that the children are left without a conviction in either faith, that it is better, much better, for both men and women to restrict themselves to marrying within the faith.
Okay. So let me translate it to English. So he's saying it's wrong, or let's not ask how come men are allowed and women aren't allowed. How about we just don't do it at all because it's bad for keeping the numbers of Muslims up? That's exactly what he's saying. And I'm not putting words in his mouth. He actually talked about the number of Muslims and how, like, you know, we don't want to lose one. So he hasn't addressed it at all. And about the last 1400 years of people applying the rule in one direction, yeah, forget about that. We just won't apply the rule in either direction now. That's not equality for everything that has already happened. That doesn't really answer the question.
Not because there is a restriction from God, but because practically you can see that this is not what you want for the future generations of Muslims.
Unexpected conclusion. Thank you for that, Dr. Shabir.
Yeah, unexpected conclusion indeed, because he hasn't concluded anything about applying the Quranic rulings. Yeah, Sheikh.
Sure. Any
welcome.
last thoughts you want to share before we end this segment?
Well, if there's time for a last thought, what I would say is that another consideration that Khalid Abdul Fadl pointed to, and I should also mention here as a side note that there is a website, understanding-islam.com, in which similar answers are given as well. But now sticking to what Khalid Abdul Fadl said, you know, the people have to evaluate for themselves, and we can't evaluate for them. How important are the religious considerations? Like here we are saying, okay, what about your children? Are your children going to be Muslim or not? But somebody may be saying, well, I don't really care. Like, you know, and some people.
Someone's saying at the end of the interview, she should have told him, thanks for nothing, Dr. Shabir Ally. As someone pointed out, that's his daughter. And that's why it's his daughter interviewing him. Because if someone with, you know, who wasn't genetically related to him and actually could ask him questions back, I'm sure other Muslims would still nod along. But if someone would just had the mind to ask him a few more questions, because he still said nothing about what he thinks. He says, some scholars say this, some scholars say that. They're all contradicting. They're even contradicting the word of Allah. And let's just not do it for anybody because that's what my friend said, because that would reduce the number of Muslims there are. That's all he said so far. That's really, like, thank you for clarifying what.
With no offense, like some people are very strictly Muslims, and then some people are almost nominal Muslims, and some will say that, you know, by themselves. You know, I'm just, you know, I remember one of my professors saying that, yes, I'm a Muslim, but if you probe me, you won't find much there. You know, so you know, people are at various levels at the different spectrum.
And you could marry someone who's Muslim who doesn't practice at all, right?
Exactly.
Okay, now they're going on a tangent talking about people need to assess how much they want to adhere to the religion, but you haven't really still like answered yet. I'm sorry if this is repetitive, but he still hasn't answered. We've watched 2 videos so far. He still has not answered the question.
Practicing Muslim could marry someone who doesn't really practice Islam, who might be worse than somebody who is not a Muslim, but respects the fact that they're practicing their faith.
Exactly.
Exactly what? I never understand the point of these weird comparisons that they bring up. Like if I mention, as I have a lot of times before, how it's very unlikely for someone who's born non-Muslim, even if they're presented to Islam, to join Islam. They would say, but it could happen that a Muslim who is born Muslim is going to go to hell. And they would be like, yeah, that's a very good point. Good point what? How does that cancel each other out? Or it could happen that someone could join Islam and they would have amazing faith and they'd be a convert. Okay, but how does, what? And in this case, to relate it to this case, they're saying you could marry a Muslim woman or a Muslim man or whoever who aren't very practicing, and it would be worse than a non-practicing or whatever, a Christian woman who is adhering to her faith. What does that have to do with anything?
cooperate with you in practicing your faith and all of that. And, you know, a Muslim woman may say, look, I am a Muslim, I come from a Muslim family, but, you know, I don't have much to do with the religion. And why should the religion restrict me from marrying outside? I love this guy. He's not a Muslim, but he's a good person. You know, they would find it incomprehensible that there is some kind of like as a hammer coming down on them at an unexpected moment. Like, where does this come from? So if one is not following other rules, then why this rule? And the rule might be imposed by parents and
How evasive of this guy. So now he's saying, he's kind of implying that the people who are asking this question, they feel like that their life is constricted, or there's a hammer down and there's a rule, when they're not even following the rest of religion. So it's easy for them to just evade that rule. You haven't even explained why the rule is, why the rule makes sense. He just said they think it's some kind of unreasonable rule, and he's been talking for what, 30 minutes, and he hasn't explained why it's a reasonable rule. He still hasn't.
family and so on, the social context.
And he's trying to blame it on, oh, well, if you're not religious anyway, why does this rule matter? He's spinning it to, you were never a real Muslim, basically. No real Muslim would ask this question. That's the conclusion. I'm having so many light bulb moments right now.
In which people live. But so we don't want to say that the religion should be incomprehensible. We want to say, right, I mean, as Khalid al-Fadl is saying, you weigh it for yourself. You be your own judge as to, you know, what's good for you and what's good for you.
You be your own judge as to what's good for you. So go marry a Christian man. There you go. If you want to do it, do it.
Your children.
We leave it at that, Dr.
Okay,
Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that because you're contradicting yourself too much. I'm not sure if I actually, hey, let's do this. Why not? He's got 4 videos. Let's keep going. Maybe 3. This one here is about unions across Muslim sects. This will also be interesting. I haven't watched this, so this will be the first time I'm watching it.
Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Part 3 of our interfaith marriage discussion, and still so much to discuss. I want to ask you about marrying other sects of Islam. So we've talked about, you know, who you can and can't marry according to the Quran. Now, what about within Islam? Let's say marrying a Shiite Muslim marrying a Sunni Muslim, or for example, marrying an Ahmadi. What are the rules regarding that? Is there anything in the Quran that offers clarity?
Yes.
No.
So let me first of all frame this within the philosophical body of thinking to think about why does Islam have to have any concern with that? You know, somebody.
Okay, don't just throw in the word philosophy, okay? Because philosophical. Because in the last one, he's saying, why does Islam have these rules? But he hasn't talked really about his stance, right? And he hasn't talked about, okay, well, to be fair, he has explained that if a Muslim woman marries a non-Muslim man, the kids are likely to be non-Muslim, and therefore it's not good for Islam, and that's why. There you go. Okay, something to comment about that. That just implies correctly that their idea of a marriage is very patriarchal because it just mirrors Islam, right? They're projecting. He's saying in Islam, the man gets to decide a lot of things, such as the religion of the child. So if we presume that from the other person, because we presume that men are a lot of things, right? We project that, then we shouldn't let Muslim women get married to non-Muslim men because our numbers are going to go down and those people are going to go to hell and so on and so forth. So like, is that really a philosophical position that you're taking, Sheikh? And yeah, this is very interesting here. Before we begin to watch, Rachel has a good point to bring up. There must be nothing about that because all those sects developed after Muhammad's death, actually at first because of his death. So interview done. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Okay, let's see what he has to say. That's a very good point, though. If sects weren't mentioned in the Quran, if anything, there should be no sects. Let's see what happens.
He says, I want to get married. Why does religion interfere with my happiness? So we can think of a situation where there's no religion, but parents try to school their children. And one of the issues is, you know, what makes a successful marriage? You marry somebody who is compatible with you, it's more likely that you're going to have success in your marriage. And religion comes into the picture. One of the issues of incompatibility can be religion. People fight over religious matters as they fight over politics and sports. So if we think of God wanting the best for his creatures, especially those who choose to believe in God and want to follow God's guidance, part of that guidance will be about, It
irks me when they say that. Those who choose to believe. Yeah, Sheikh, did you ever choose anything about Islam in your life? Do you think this guy woke up and chose to be a Muslim? I bet all my money on it that he was born a Muslim. And even the people who join Islam, they're not choosing to be a Muslim. They have a gap that they want to fill, or a spiritual gap, or whatever it may be the reasoning is. And Islam was the one that they came across, and they said, you know what, this kind of makes sense. And more often than not, they end up leaving. But to say that someone chooses to believe or to disbelieve, like you can choose to be introduced to the religion and you're receptive to belief to begin with, or receptive to be it the spirituality of it, the superstition of it, the hope that you want to get from it, but you don't choose to believe or disbelieve. So they just casually drop it every now and then, and they all genuinely believe it. And that is mind-baffling to me. It is mind-baffling to me that the most intelligent Muslims out there would still not understand the concept that belief is not a choice. Because if it was a choice, I would put like all my money on the table and make them disbelieve for like 2 hours. Just try it. You can't. You can't. As a Muslim, you can't intentionally disbelieve for 2 hours. Now, of course, he's going to say something like, well, I don't want to die in those 2 hours and then go to hell. But you genuinely can't make yourself disbelieve or like believe in another. I don't know what example to give them. I've given examples of colors and like it's still not getting the point across. So it just irks me when they just casually drop that choose to believe
in God and want to follow God's guidance. Part of that guidance will be about, how do you get a successful marriage? But of course, that's not the core of religion. Core of religion is about the things that constitute worship, like prayer and fasting and giving charity and performing pilgrimage.
There's so many different cores of religion that I'm confused now. So is religion at the core good for you, for your own benefit and so on, or is it just this stuff?
The things that constitute worship, like prayer and fasting and giving charity and performing pilgrimages to sacred sites. These things form the core of the Islamic faith, starting with the declaration of faith in God and in God's messenger, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So marriage is just one of the aspects of life that falls within the broader aspect of the broader ambit of religious culture and civilization. In that sense, we should not give more importance then to the question of marriage than it deserves. It's not like, if you marry a person outside of your faith, it's like if you're committing adultery or it's as if you are, committed such a...
What do you mean not give it more than it deserves? I mean, in Islam, a lot of scholars think that this kind of topic, for example, which foot to use to enter the washroom, or else the devil is going to step on your toes or something. I'm making up the toes part, but which foot to use to step in the washroom is sunnah. They have debates about this kind of stuff, and you're telling me the marriage is not really a big issue because you want to brush it off?
Major sin. It's still a marriage.
Because it's not zina? But people are genuinely terrified very often that I'm doing the wrong thing, I'm going to go to hell. So they justifiably have questions. And marriage is a huge thing. You choose someone. He just mentioned this incompatibility is a huge deal. And also, are our kids going to hell? Is my husband going to hell? Is my wife going to hell? And he just says it's not a big deal, guys.
Or is as if you are, committed such a major sin. It's still a marriage. You're trying to do something decent and have a decent family life. But then we want to know now, what is the specific regulation from within the religion? So here too, there's nothing specific in the Quran about marrying within your own sect, because from the Quranic point of view, when this is being revealed, there is no sect.
There were no sects at that time.
It's just like the Prophet, peace be upon him, and his followers are all of the
one faith. Do they not see the issue here?
So given that, with the emergence of sects, Muslim scholars have had to think about it. Okay, so we have 4 schools of Islamic jurisprudence. Can, for example, one person from the one school within Sunni, within the broader Sunni body, marry a person from the other following from within the broader Sunni? So, for example, can a Shafi'i marry a Hanafi? And
I'm going to stop you right there. And I think most Muslims never even thought about that, because nobody really for the most part, nobody really knows what madhab they adhere to, what like school of thought and scholarship they adhere to. Some people do, but the majority don't really know. But okay.
And some gave against that, again, because of compatibility issues. Because if you have...
That's a good point. So it can happen that scholars in Islam would say, if you are still Sunni, we're the same sect, but you follow the wrong madhab or the different madhab, then that is haram that we get married, or that's not good, or makruh, or whatever it may be. So the point here is, even among Muslims, among the same sect, there are scholars that say there's too much conflict. Like, how ironic is that? The fact that they're just laughing about, oh, there were no sects in the Quran, of course. That's a self-own, a massive self-own, like a self-goal for into Islam. Yes, there were no sects before Muhammad died, and then the sects emerged. What does that say about the Quran that had no even idea that sects were going to happen? I don't know if there was some prophecy in a hadith or a verse that said, people are going to start fighting, but that's not really saying much. If you knew people were going to start fighting because you're not clear enough or because of misunderstandings, then just clear up those misunderstandings. Tell them who's going to be the next Khalifa, and don't have a bunch of, different factions split up and a bunch of different interpretations of the same verse. As he put it, he himself was citing different scholars in the past hour about different matters, and they all disagree with each other. So this goes to demonstrate even Muslims may not get along with Muslims, and they may not marry Muslims, and they don't even know what Allah said is allowed.
Different ways of deciding certain things, you can have dissent within the family. Let's say you're trying to eat a certain food, but one family member is following an interpretation that says that food is haram, and the other is following the interpretation that says the food is halal. So you can have disputes over, who cooks what and who leaves what food where, and the other person feels contaminated by what the other person considers.
This is a reminder to all the, I don't know if you want to call them cultural Muslims, Muslims in the West, non-Muslims, anyone who's not familiar with Islam and life in a Muslim country, in a Muslim community. It's such micromanagement. It seeps into every aspect of your life, to the point that two Sunnis might disagree about specifics of food. It doesn't have to do with pork. I'm not sure what exactly he's citing here, but it could be like between two different halal, I don't know, ways of cut the meat. I don't even know. It could happen that you can have marital issues or familiar issues because you're disagreeing on what Allah said you can eat, or else you're going to burn in hell. That's how like insidious religion can be. It goes down into the minds and into every aspect of your life. And if you are not in this environment, it's not just extremists, right? It's not just extremists who live like this. Unfortunately, there's a lot of moderate Muslims who subject themselves to this, or their families subject them to it, because they feel like, what else am I going to do? Otherwise, I don't want to go to hell. So that's just a reminder that the way that you handle Islam in the West is nothing like the reality of millions and millions of Muslims and ex-Muslims out there. Like, how can Christians even conceptualize this level of micromanagement? That you and your wife would have fights because you're both Catholic, but you have like small differences about what you can eat, and there's cross-contamination because the food touched. Like, this is not about an allergy. This is about differing opinions in the same sect. Like, that's how complicated this stuff is. That's how insidious it is.
To be fine.
I didn't think of something as basic as that.
Yeah, so it happens.
Me neither.
And then you can find, a major thing that happens to Muslims today, especially in our North American context and the UK as well, perhaps even Australia, and maybe where Muslims find themselves as minorities nowadays in new modern democratic societies, but have a mixture of people from all around the world following different interpretations of Islam, is the celebration of Eid. So you can have within the same family, one person thinking that Eid is today, this is our major festival, we're going to have a massive celebration today, and the other person thinks, no, today is the day that we're supposed to be fasting, we shouldn't be celebrating Eid yet, it is still the end of Ramadan, it's still like the last day of Ramadan. And so we have major discrepancies that can affect even a household and a split within the family.
So what about Sunnis then, or Ahmadis?
So
she knows that, like, whenever he's going off point, and whenever he's kind of incriminating himself or Islam further and further without really answering anything, she's trying to control the interview a little bit. And, you know, I commend her for that in some ways. Like, thank you for trying to keep him on point. But he's already said what he said, which is basically that even within like the most minute differences among the same sect, you could have issues, like real issues, because you can't agree which is the, you know, the equivalent of like Christmas Eve or whatever, which day we have to keep fasting and which day we wouldn't fast. How difficult is this religion to understand? That two Muslims from the same sect would still have conflict and cause familial issues like that. And he said it very well. In a lot of these democratic modern countries, as he put it, Muslims from all over the world are meeting, and that's when they realize, oh, like we're very different in so many ways. So interesting.
So I wanted to cap this off by split within the family.
So what about Sunnis then,
what about
or
Sunnis?
Ahmadis?
So I wanted to cap this off by saying, finally, in conclusion, yes, a Muslim can marry within the larger Sunni body.
Okay.
A Muslim can marry a person from the other school of Islamic jurisprudence. A Hanafi can marry a Shafi and vice versa, even despite those differences. But I would say, so legally, yes, your marriage will be considered absolutely valid in the Islamic faith, but that's from the legal standpoint. From the practical standpoint, as much as you can marry a person that is more and more compatible with you, that is more conducive to a successful marriage than to marry a person that may have a different outlook, a different interpretation, a different way of following, even though they're your fellow Sunnis. Okay, but I don't want to stretch that too much because I don't want to, you know, people to feel divided from each other. So now, framing it that way, now coming to Shias, if we say that Muslims cannot marry outside of the Sunni faith, it's not that we have anything of discrimination against others. We're just talking about the compatibility. And some scholars have said that.
Ooh, I want to highlight that for a second, because very often I mean, just in these few videos, and I've seen others do it, they kind of wash their hands from everything. Just be like, it's in the Quran. I'm just explaining the context of it. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm just saying Allah says it's bad people. When in reality, from the outside, there is no Allah saying anything. An outsider would see you, Muslim, repeating it or defending it and saying, I wash my hands from it. It's my God saying it. Big guy upstairs. It's not my fault. I'm not hateful. So let's repeat what he said here. I'm not discriminating.
Discrimination against the Sunni faith. It's not that we have anything of discrimination against others. We're just talking about the compatibility.
It's not that we have any discrimination. We're talking about compatibility. And he does have a point. Like, I don't want to discount the point that he's making, which is there are going to be incompatibilities between a Sunni and a Shia, and even between Sunnis. But I want to draw parallels between that. If someone said, and this is not my narrative, but if someone said Islam is incompatible with my city, and just Muslims practicing anything outside of just, you know, inside their own mosque, anything outside of that, any events, anything at all, that's incompatible with my city. Hey, I'm not discriminating. I'm just saying it's incompatibility. And often there's a lot of things about Islam. I don't think that a lot of people in the West are pushing these incompatible things onto laws or anything like that. But there are a lot of incompatibilities of Islam with secularism, Islam with democracy, Islam with progress, Islam with the West, as whatever that term means. So if we were to say we don't want it, or we want laws against it or something, that's not discrimination, according to him. That's just an incompatibility.
And some scholars have said that Sunnis cannot marry Shi'is, but the scholarship that I respect on this question says, why not? They are actually fellow Muslims. They have a different interpretation on certain issues. Some of them are very important issues, but nonetheless, on the very core issues of Islam, we all agree. You know, there is only one God. The Quran is the book from God. We believe in the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So we're basically talking about the same faith system, and even practically there's prayer and fasting and so on. There are different interpretations about all of these issues, but nonetheless, we can see, you know, if somebody's looking down from Mars, they would see that Sunnis and Shiis are basically, you know, of the same faith.
No, they would not. But something I want to highlight here. So something to keep in mind, Islam as it was revealed, Islam as we see it with all the texts that it has, is a political ideology. It is totalitarian. It is all of the above. But the way that Muslims practice it, I'm not talking about the UK, to be honest, because that is a mess that I don't want to touch. But when it comes to, for example, he's talking about North America, from what I've witnessed online and the people that I've met when I visited, it's it's not that they're trying to set up some kind of political system. They're genuinely trying to follow Islam in whatever way they think is right, and they genuinely think the Prophet is an amazing person, and they genuinely believe all that. But at the core of it, Islam is a political ideology. They just aren't aware of all the facets of it. And someone like him he's just downplaying it.
So, for example, Sheikh Faraz Rabbani, one of our leading scholars in the Toronto area, says unequivocally, yes, a Muslim, a Sunni can marry a Shi'i person legally. I mean, in terms of Islamic law, their marriage would be considered absolutely valid, no question about the marriage itself. But practically, he doesn't recommend it, again, because of compatibility issues. Because
so what about Ahmadis then?
Okay.
Ahmadi
so with Ahmadis, the situation is a little.
So Sunnis and Sunnis, there might be issues between the same sect, but it is legal. Sunnis and Shias, it is legal, but scholars don't recommend it, or at least the one that he's citing doesn't recommend it because of incompatibilities. Even though he himself just said at the core of it, they all share the same thing, and someone from Mars or whatever looking down would see that they're the same. It's just everything and the opposite, everything and the opposite. He's just presenting all opinions out there that go against each other, and everyone in the comments is like, mashallah, Sheikh, jazakallah khairan, good job. What are you even saying?
Bit more difficult to rule on, because
and okay, that's the point of this stream, by the way. I honestly, this topic is not the most interesting to me, and it's like I feel for the people in interfaith marriages and who are suffering because of the community's view of them. I feel for the people who can't get into these interfaith marriages. That, like, don't interpret that to mean that I don't care about this at all. But I think the bigger point of this stream is to highlight how he and so many other apologists, like he's like the most decent of them, goes about trying to answer a question. So I hope this is representative of his style. 3 videos so far.
The founder of the Ahmadi sect has said things which have been interpreted different ways. The Qadiani branch has taken it that he is the messenger Jesus, on whom be peace, having returned. Not that Jesus is coming down from the sky, but somebody else is born, and he is somehow like in the likeness of Jesus. And in terms, the Lahori branch thinks that he only meant to claim that he is something like the Mahdi, or a righteous person who Muslims are expecting generally to appear, and he has just now appeared. So in that case, there is more scope with the Lahori branch to think of them as being closer to the Sunni faith, because they also pray and fast and so on, like we do, almost in line with the Hanafi school of Islamic jurisprudence. So one would want to know why not. But this is a contentious issue, because many Muslim bodies have ruled that Ahmadis are outside of the pale of Islam, and sometimes the fatwa comes the other way as well. They think that we are outside of the proper following because we did not accept this righteous person as a leader. So that's a highly contentious issue, and we cannot arrive at a fair ruling on that.
That can summarize all the videos, to be honest. That's a highly contentious issue. One thing I want to comment on is John Doe saying he's a very snakish guy. He says one thing and means the opposite. So Shabir Ally, at least he doesn't give me that impression that he's snakish. Like, there's a lot of other people who deserve that, like deserve that medal to be slapped on their forehead. He doesn't come across as that kind of person, though I honestly don't know how to judge him anymore, because he's saying stuff and the opposite. Is it that his cognitive dissonance is so intense that he can't reconcile these thoughts in his own head, so he just blurts it all out? Could it be? Could it be that he knows that there's no official ruling, and somehow he retains his faith, and somehow he still sticks to his, and he's just trying not to piss anyone off, so he just throws all the interpretations out there? Could be. So I'm not making this video to be like, go, bother this guy, attack him and this and that. But I think his own words, let the Quran speak, let Shabir Ally speak for the Quran, and let Umar the Sahabi speak for the Quran, will show you that it's full of contradictions, and Shabir Ally is not even sure of what he's saying. Really, he's not really making any definitive statements. He's not even like making a statement and saying, and Allah knows best. He's just saying, this is what that scholar said, this is the opposite of it, and that's all. So I don't have a judgment of him yet. It's just that I I think he demonstrated that you cannot really trust the scholar, in the sense that you cannot, not just a scholar, you cannot trust a dawah person or an apologist or an imam or a sheikh or anyone in that kind of position, because not that they're intentionally lying to you, it's just sometimes they're not even aware of how what they're saying contradicts itself, and they just laugh it off. So what I mean by don't trust them is, take what they're saying, look at the sources, think it through. Don't just take the conclusion and be like, the conclusion of this video, which I don't even know what it is, or the videos before it, just take it and go to the comments and say, Jazakallahu khairan. No. Just actually think about it for a moment. And now I'm curious, interfaith marriage and world religions. It's only 9 minutes long, so let's bear with me through this. Let's get through the last one in the 4 parts.
Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
It's my pleasure to be on.
We've been talking about interfaith marriage in the past. We looked at how Muslims view interfaith marriage and particularly how the Quran looks at it. But I thought it would be interesting to widen our focus a little bit and look at how other religions view interfaith marriage. What have you found in your study of other religions?
I found some interesting tidbits. And, in our modern times, we think of openness and wide acceptance of a variety of views and tolerance towards and acceptance of other religions and so on. So you would think that the world's religions in general might be moving in that direction to be more inclusive. Mm-hmm. And of course, within all of the world's major religions, you have movements in that direction. But you also have a traditional bent. You also have the way in which the religions have been established and what is the traditional basic presupposition. The traditional basic presupposition in many of the world's great religions is that people marry only within the faith. And marrying outside of the faith, sometimes there is no way of incorporating such a marriage within the religious system. It might be tolerated. Somebody may be allowed to have a civic wedding, and maybe you can have some kind of makeshift sort of celebration with some religious overtones. But the full acceptance is very hard to amalgamate with the traditional religious presupposition.
Mm-hmm. So can we look at some religions then? Maybe let's start with Judaism.
Yes. So Judaism obviously is heavily based on the Old Testament, or what Christians call the Old Testament, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Scriptures. In Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse number 3, there is an interdiction against marrying from among the various tribes, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and so on. That seems to be like an ongoing presupposition, though many of the biblical figures, Moses, for example, is known to have had a non-Jewish wife or a wife from outside of the Israelite circles, and so too many other important figures of the Bible. But later on in the Bible, we have Nehemiah speaking against marrying outside of the religion, and Ezra came down so heavily as to say that if one had a spouse of another faith or outside of the Israelite community, then one should actually divorce. He made that necessary.
I can't exactly verify what he's saying about the Bible, but I honestly, I don't have a reason to not believe it, what he's saying, because I know that there's like the little that I know about Christianity is that there is a lot of contradictions and overlooked things that depends on what you want to look at, which version of the Bible you look at. So I totally believe that. And I just want to remind my followers, don't think that I somehow believe that Christianity is true or has potential to be true, because it has the same downfalls as Islam in many ways. It's not exactly the same, of course. And the reason why I don't talk about it is because I'm not part of it, and because it doesn't affect my life very much, and because it's easier to get out of it. But yeah, there are contradictions.
So when traditionalists would read that, they would say that, okay, marrying outside of the Jewish circles is not allowed. And then you can have many modern varieties of that. So Orthodox and conservatives will tend to lean in that direction of the literal or semi-literal application, maintaining that tradition. Reform Jews or Reconstructionists would head in a more modern direction, be more tolerant, yet we see that sometimes there is especially among the Reform, there could be a sort of ambivalence, and the those who follow Reconstructionist, I don't know if I'm saying the word correctly, Judaism would have more of an openness to welcome an interfaith marriage.
What about Christianity? I know there are many denominations, so
To reiterate, Islam does not really allow it in one direction. And according to him, the way to achieve equality is just don't do it at all, because there's going to be fewer Muslim offspring as a result.
Maybe different perspectives on this matter.
Yeah, so Christianity is based not only in the Old Testament, but also in the New. But naturally, the Old Testament being a larger book with
I'm going to have a more
said
interesting
on this
video
matter
after
would
this one, by
have
the
an
way.
overarching
Short one.
influence. But the influence doesn't stop there. There are specific passages in the New Testament that deal with the question, especially in the writings of Paul. So Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians, showed a sort of openness to the interfaith marriage, but it seems that there he was talking about the marriage as it already is. So we can imagine a situation where there were few Christians, many non-Christians. Those Christians who became Christians, left their non-Christian past, and they may already have been married. And so you have two persons married, both non-Christian. One becomes a Christian, then what's to be done with the non-Christian spouse? So it seems that Paul is saying there that, okay, you have the non-Christian spouse, just live with that. And there's great hope that this non-Christian spouse will eventually convert to your faith as well.
Well, this is still a win for Christianity versus Islam, because in Islam it says in the verse that we came across earlier, you need to divorce your wife and ask for your money back.
And
There's a money back guarantee. The guarantee is that she remains his wife as a Muslimah, and if she leaves the religion, then he has to divorce her and take the money back. Like, I don't understand how that's a right for the woman in any way.
His second letter to the Corinthians, he seems to be taking a more aloof stance and saying now that it is not right for a Christian to be yoked with a non-Christian. Now, he may not have been speaking about marriage in particular; it's not so very clear. But many interpret this as meaning that you cannot tie the knot meaning the wedding knot with a non-Christian. And so we have this sort of ambivalence with two different sorts of interpretations. Some Christians being open to interfaith marriages, and some being more traditional and not so open. Mm-hmm. In any case, on my way to the studio this morning, I was listening to some Christian expositors explaining the view about this, and some are saying very clearly that no, a Christian should not marry a non-Christian, and some have given practical reasons. Like, let's say you're thinking about all your decisions are going to be made with Jesus in mind, and if you're married to a non-Christian spouse, how are you going to discuss what you're thinking? You're going to have to keep that aspect of your thinking quite hidden, because the moment you're going to say, okay, but I feel that Jesus is telling me this, that's not going to go down very well in your conversation about
Okay, this is actually a good point. I have nothing I disagree on here, but it's a issue that I keep seeing reoccurring in ex-Muslim spaces, people asking for advice. I have a spouse, husband or wife, and maybe they have kids, maybe they don't. And they're saying, I have doubts about Islam and I'm terrified because they know for sure they're going to get in trouble with their spouse, or their spouse is already sensing it, or their spouse is already trying to push them to change, or maybe their spouse is understanding, but they still would rather they be religious, and it's causing a lot of issues. And this is why, or I see people saying, my boyfriend wants to convert to Islam, or someone wants me to convert and join him, or whatever the situation may be. I always want to remind them, think of the long term. It's for me, for example, I've said this before. I've been asked, and then I said it. I just didn't just come out and say it. I would never marry a Muslim. And the reason for that is not because, as he put it, not discrimination, but incompatibility. And it's just that. I cannot marry someone who sees me as either misguided or a liar or whatever it may be, going to hell. I cannot marry someone who thinks, whatever, every decision in their life they have to take by referencing first Islam. It could be something as minuscule as which foot to enter the washroom with, or it could be something bigger. There's just never going to be that kind of trust that how they think, unless you're both on the same page about religion as well. So I do agree. And that is, here's something that him and I agree on kind of almost totally. There's always going to be incompatibilities in interfaith marriages unless they're both tolerant to the point that they're not really following their religion as much anymore. Because a lot of these religions, and I can't speak for all of them, they do not like that kind of tolerance. It just doesn't work. It's not baked into the religion. How can you be tolerant to your spouse wanting your kids to go to hell? It just doesn't work that way. So, in my opinion, should you try to make an interfaith marriage work? I don't know. I really don't know. It depends on the situation. Just be careful, think of the long term. And at the end of the day, if you both love each other and you both can't make sense of why the rules are put in place and why your religions go against each other, you should probably come to the conclusion that both of them are not, from God.
whether you plan to move to a particular neighborhood or send your kids to a particular school or something like this.
So Dr. Shabir, when I look at all of the world religions, Hinduism, Sikhism, even Baha'is have some restrictions, right? The Quran, the Muslims in the Quran have certain allowances. Why do you think that the Quran has these allowances for interfaith marriage, whereas these other religions might not?
It seems that the Quran wanted to have a more inclusive sort of society in which there is mutual tolerance and acceptance. The Quran it gives an impression that prophets and messengers have come to all people. People have been guided in their own way. They have their religions. We should compete with each other in doing good things and so on. At the same time, as we have explained, there are restrictions in the Quran as well. It says, do not marry a polytheist, for example. And for the same practical reason that I've just mentioned from a Christian pastor, in that if you're going to do everything with God in mind, well, then how are you going to have decisions made jointly with another person?
Reminder that the question is actually a good one. She's asking, how come Quran or Islam allows it, interfaith marriage, to some extent, but the other religions don't? Let's see if he's actually answering it.
For whom this is quite strange that you're going to have God at the center of all of this.
And I guess there's a fear also about whether one would retain one's faith after marriage, and then what would happen to the children?
Exactly.
How would they be brought up?
And what faith would the children be brought up? And how would you be instructing your children on the faith if the child is saying, nowadays for Muslims, it's an ongoing concern that children are asked, well, why do I have to be Muslim? So if you're telling your child, well, you have to be Muslim, and the child is saying, but mom is not a Muslim, or dad is not a Muslim, you can see the difficulty there. Or mom isn't praying, or dad isn't praying.
But you can extend this logic. Well, first of all, he's not answering the question, but to go on his tangent with him, you can extend this logic to a lot of things. This is why a lot of Muslims, when they live in a community with other faiths, right, outside of their Muslim communities, unless it's a very tight-knit community, you can be in North America, for example, and only go to a Muslim school. Same thing with like Catholics can just go to a Catholic school, but I think you can join their schools as well. But point is, if you're just in a community where you're just around people like you, you're never going to think about it that way. So it doesn't have to be your mom or your dad who's not Muslim. It could be your friend or your neighbor or anyone you know, and it'll get you to think, do those people deserve to go to hell? How come he gets away with, how come we're letting him get away with just not being Muslim and condemning himself to hell? And I love him. I care about my friend. Why would I let him do that? I don't understand how more Muslims don't have that thought and then follow up on it. Usually they stop at, inshallah, Allah is going to take care of it. If he's good, inshallah, he's going to convert or whatever. It doesn't have to be your parent for you to have that realization. So please, more people have that realization.
And so on and so forth. So we see very good reasons for marrying within the faith. And for these good reasons, we see that across the board, many of the world's religions, even ones which are generally very tolerant, like Hinduism, for example, is very open to the idea that there are many paths that lead to salvation. And yet, partly because of the caste system, there is an insistence in marrying within certain circles. And we see a certain sort of restriction in Sikhism and Baha'ism as well, though these are generally more inclusive faiths.
There's so much more we could talk about, but thank you for sharing.
Like Hinduism, for example.
Wait here. Oh, there is so much more you could talk about, like the question itself. Here's what he said to answer the question after all of this.
For these good reasons, we see that across the board are marrying within the faith. And for these good, we see very good reasons for marrying within the faith. And for these good reasons, we see that across the board, many of the world's religions, even ones which are generally very...
He says we see good reasons for remaining, like marrying inside the faith, but that wasn't the question.
I guess there's a fear also about whether one would retain one's faith after marriage, and then what would happen to the children?
Exactly.
How would they be brought up?
In what case, if the child is saying,
nowadays
for Muslims, it's
that wasn't what she asked at all, right?
Whether one would retain one's faith after.
Her question was, how come it's only Islam that allows interfaith marriages?
In the Quran have certain allowances. Why do you think Sikhism, even Baha'is have some restrictions, right? The Quran, the Muslims in the Quran have certain allowances. Why do you think that the Quran has these allowances for interfaith marriage, whereas these other religions might not?
Do you guys think, and girls, in the comments, can you please let me know, did he answer that question? Did he answer that question at all? And again, this speaks to a larger point here. I don't know, like I can try to scroll through the comments. I highly doubt that anyone here would call him out on that and be like, hey, you didn't answer that question. Not just to be antagonistic or anything, but anyone actually listening to his words should be able to pick up the fact that he did not answer the question. And it's not even a question that would damn Islam or anything, or it shouldn't. Why does Islam allow interfaith marriages in one specific direction, or at all, but other religions don't? He has not answered that. And I can give you an answer because I already let Islam speak. I let the Quran speak. I let him speak. So I can give you my answer, but I just want to make sure that I'm not, that I'm not lying here. I'm scrolling through the comments. Let's see. Very honest of you not to mention that it's only for men. Blah, blah, blah. This channel is misguiding people. And then here's the thing. They did a whole video about this topic, explaining everything clearly and raising very interesting questions. Go seek the information. Everyone here on the stream has watched the videos with me. Have they addressed any of these points points? What interesting questions have they brought up? Billahi alaikum, did I not bring up more interesting questions in this stream than he did in the past like couple of hours of us watching him? So yeah, no, in this question, he was asked directly about other religions, right? He was asked, how come Islam allows for interfaith marriages, but not other religions, or how come it's more restricted? Because the topic of this specific video is interfaith marriage in world religions. So it is very valid that he's bringing up world religions, but he's not really addressing the question. And like I said, that speaks to the tone that they use. First of all, I don't even know if they listen to the questions. Sometimes they just go on some kind of a rant or some kind of a monologue, and they have a point there that has nothing to do with the question, but they do make some kind of a point. And then people listen and they're like, oh, a point was made. Next question. But what does that have to do with anything? Like, his point that he's making is that interfaith marriages have issues in them, and that's why it's better to marry within your faith. Okay, what does that have to do anything with the question that she just asked? Let's go back and listen to the question again.
The Quran, the Muslims in the Quran have certain allowances. Why do you think that the Quran has these allowances for interfaith marriage, whereas these other religions might not?
Yeah, he addressed none of that in the next couple minutes. And allow me to answer now. Allow Aladdin to speak. Allow the ex-Muslim to speak. So Brian is saying it's deflection. So here's the thing. I still don't know what to think about Shabir Ally. So after watching these videos back to back, I don't trust him at all. Like, I don't know if it's intellectual blindness that he has, like a blind spot that he has, or that he's actually a dishonest, deflecting person. Because the answer that I can come up with is not a good answer. Why does Islam allow it? Well, Islam allowed it so that the women from these other tribes can be taken by the men in Islam. After all these wars and after all that stuff, aside from taking the slaves, aside from the slaves that they can get with, and there's a verse that I have lined up that I want to show you about that in a minute. Aside from all that, what other reason would there be to take in the women? Like, he could have spent it as, well, because those women needed protection and this and that, but he would then highlight the fact that it's only in one direction. So maybe he's trying to avoid the topic altogether and just not answer that question. Maybe he's just so used to this style that he hasn't even pondered that the question wasn't answered. It's like the thinking is surface level. They hear a few keywords, and I noticed that among a lot of the audience of these apologists of Dawah Men, and I'm not just talking about like the very toxic type of Dawah Men. Even Shabir Ally is such a nice guy. It's like they're programmed to see one word and be like, oh yeah, equality, Islam, let's talk about this, or interfaith marriages. Oh yeah, that they're not very compatible, but that's not the question at all. And like I said, I don't know whether I think he's deceptive or lacking some sort of, or he's got like some sort of intellectual blind spot here that he's not aware of. But either or, that the outcome is the same. At the end of the day, whether he's doing it intentionally or not, he's still not answering. He's still putting on PR for Islam in a way. And he's still, like, everyone watching him is just complacent. Everyone in the comments is always like, MashaAllah, great lecture. And let me tell you, when I was a Muslim and I had questions and I would look up videos like these, and everyone would just tell me, brother, just listen to this person. Brother, just listen to this person. And I start off with the Arab ones, just FYI. But eventually, if I came across these, because on the English-speaking, Muslim spaces, they would always be like Zakir Naik and blah, blah, blah. And then people would be like, no, ignore Zakir Naik. He's kind of a, Shabir Ally is very reasonable. He's very smart. He's very intelligent. Yasir Qadi has a PhD, this and that. And then you listen to them, 2 hours of nothingness. And what frustrated me as a Muslim was looking at the comments, and everyone's like, very interesting, fantastic points. I enjoy his eloquence. I can be more eloquent while petting my cat, while scratching my head, while doing a bunch of things at the same time. Eloquence means nothing when he's not getting to the point. And that frustrated me, and that made me feel insane. So here we get to the point of, why do ex-Muslims feel so distressed sometimes? Because it's like waking up in a reality and everyone around you is kind of just like a drone. Where you look at the comments and everyone is agreeing except for you, and you start questioning yourself, what is wrong with me? Like, why am I not seeing it like they are? Everyone thinks he's eloquent except me. The problem must be me. But this is why I have a channel like this. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm here. One of the reasons why I'm here, because I felt like there were enough people, obviously, like there were people doing what I'm doing here, but I felt like I needed to do that for others as well. The ones who are already making ex-Muslim content or commenting on this kind of stuff cannot handle everything. They cannot handle all of these apologists that make video after video after video, and their family members and everyone. And here I am to remind you that you are sane. Like, here we're in a space where we all get to actually react to this together and remind ourselves this is truly like we're all watching the same thing here. We're all dissecting the same speech here. And we're not the ones who are like, mindlessly clapping along. I've asked a lot of questions here, and none of them are meant to like disprove Islam or anything. I'm just picking apart his own words without going too far outside of them. So yeah, so I just wanted to reiterate that. I want to show you a controversial verse, so please don't leave yet. But someone had recommended this video by Shabir Ally, and it's a minute long. So let's watch this.
So what is Islam's view on concubines?
A Muslim man.
Is it working? I think the audio is a little low, but she's asking, what is Islam's view on concubines? Concubines, for those who don't know, are the slaves that Muslims own that they're allowed to sleep with.
So what is Islam's view on concubines?
A Muslim man can have up to 4 wives at once. And in addition to the 4 wives, he can have an unlimited number of concubines, which refer to women who are basically have slave status.
Stop sugarcoating stuff, man. Have slave status. Okay, I don't like this guy anymore.
When they are owned by her master, a woman owned by her master has to freely give herself to the master. The master.
Let's hear that again.
When they are owned by her master, a woman owned by her master has to freely give herself to the master. The master has the right to have sexual relations with her as though she were one of his wives.
Oh boy. Okay, so a woman owned by her master has to freely give herself to the master. That is problematic on its own. The master has the right to have sexual relations with her, has the right. This is the same guy who was like talking to his daughter. He's saying this to his daughter, people. He's saying this to his daughter, to his daughter's face. Like, can you imagine being in a situation where your daughter's taken away to be a concubine, where another man has the right whenever he wants? And look at this statement right here. The master has the right. Let me put this guy in full screen. The master has the right to have sexual relations with blah, 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 as if she were one of his wives. So he has the right to have sexual relations with his wives. Like, he's not realizing that he's also condoning that dynamic for the wife, as if she's one of his wives. What are wives then? But property. Like, you're making property close enough to be a wife that you can have sex with whenever you want because it's your right. What are you even saying? What are you even saying? What a despicable man.
Right to have.
And like, I almost think to myself, no, you can't call him a despicable man. He's nice at heart, but okay, blame religion, but he's a despicable man.
Sexual relations with her as though she were one of his wives.
And how does consent play into this at all?
Oof, imagine being in a situation where your daughter's asking you, so you can rape our maid? How does consent play into it?
Or can we?
The understanding is that by virtue of the fact that she's owned, she does not have the right to consent, or to withhold herself from her master. Okay, you heard it here. By virtue of see the spinelessness. The understanding is that, again, like, oh, it's not me, guys. It's the understanding that by virtue of the fact that she's owned, she does not have the right to consent or to withhold herself from her master. Right to her. I mean, if you want to convert to Islam, make sure that you go through this video first. To consent, or to withhold herself from her master. The master has the full right over her, and her consent does not play anything in this relationship. Okay, well, thank you for confirming what we already knew. I still have a verse that I want to show you guys, but I want to comment on this point.
Someone's saying jokingly, I thought only extremists believed in this. Here's the problem. Here's why it's so tricky to talk about Islam. I'm always vilified whenever I mention Islam and Muslims, because it is not true that only extremists believe this stuff. This guy sitting right here with rights, with a social insurance number, or I don't know if he is a citizen or not, whatever. He actually like exists around us, and so many people like him exist. And the thing is, Muslims are not actually hoping to do this, especially everyday Muslims around you. They're not thinking about this stuff. Many of them don't even know this stuff. But at the end of the day, this is part of their religion. And when they find out about it, a lot of them are just put in a very difficult position where they have to think to themselves, do I want to go to hell, or do I need to make up something to make sense of this? They're just forced to. That's not an excuse, but they're forced to, and they're put in that position. And it's very difficult to, depending on your situation, sometimes it's kind of easy to just prance out of it and just be like, oh, well, that whole religion doesn't make sense, so now I don't have to justify anything horrid like that. But sometimes it's not difficult. It's not easy. Be it because of actual restrictions. Like I have a video in a couple of days, a stream where I'm going to talk about why women themselves, ex-Muslim women, say it's more difficult for them to leave Islam or to talk about it, or the restrictions that are on them that are worse than those on men. So it's not just extremists. And the moderates don't all believe this. And the moderates don't, most of them don't want this ever to happen. But it's difficult talking about it without making them look bad. And it's not me making them look bad. It's Shabir Ally coming out here and saying, yeah, consent doesn't play into this. And this is the kind of people that we idolize. This is our prophet. This is what we are. Except not today, except in context. It's despicable. But before we go there, it's on the same topic here. It's not a very happy topic, but I feel like this is important to contextualize. I'm gonna try to find the tafsir for this later. I'm gonna pull it up in Arabic just because that's the one I'm reading, but I'm also gonna try to find the tafsir as we speak. So let me try to vamp while I'm doing this. With verse 424, let me put it up on screen. It is in Arabic, but I'll get to it in a second. 424 English translation. Okay, there we go. Because this brings some context to everything he's been talking about and just paints Islam in like just the most accurate light here when it comes to this topic. All right, so, and also prohibited to you are all, this is not mentioned, but it's context from the previous verse. Married women, except those your right hand possesses, your slaves. This is the decree of Allah upon you. Well, if the big guy upstairs says so, what choice do I have? And lawful to you are all others beyond these, provided that you seek them in marriage with gifts from your property, but provided that you pay like the what's it called, the mahr, desiring chastity, not unlawful sexual intercourse. Okay. So for whatever you enjoy of marriage from them, give them their due compensation as an obligation. Again, this transactional nature of it, how they phrase it as it is the right of the woman to get paid, right? To get a mahr, but then give it back if you leave Islam. And also, this is what makes the man dominant over you. Like if you look at verse 434, it's very similar. And let's go there and then we'll come back. Verse 434. Men are dominant over women because of what God given over the other. No, God faddal means preferred some of them over the other. And what some is he talking about? He's talking about men. What some are there? وَبِمَا أَنْفَقُوا مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ, and because of what they spend for maintenance from their wealth. So men are dominant over women, or caretakers, or whatever you want to phrase it, because they spend money on their women, because Allah mandated it that way, and that's why women are indebted to them. And that's why we go back, and it's like, oh, make sure to pay them. But as I mentioned earlier in the stream, if as we went through that other verse that Shabir Ally brought up, if she leaves Islam, you need to ask her for your money and just divorce her. And here's what I wanted to comment on. That's not the interesting part. Let's go to the Arabic tafsir. That's where the interesting part was. Yeah, okay. So there was here Ibn Kathir. Ibn Kathir is a well-known scholar. and he does tafsir, like he authored a lot of tafsir. So this isn't some kind of niche opinion. And he says here, so yeah, المحصنات حرم عليكم الأجنبيات المحصنات. So those who are married, those women who are married, who are foreign to you, not the Muslim women, are not allowed for you unless you own them, unless you have them as slaves. And here's some more detail. Here's a hadith. Let's see, one second. I really need to prepare this stuff, but yeah, okay. So the Sahaba, Sabaya Autas, they took, after the battle of Autas, or the people of Autas, I'm not sure, they took from them slaves. And the slaves, the female slaves, had husbands, min ahl shirk, polytheist husbands. This is very, very relevant to what he was saying earlier. So the female slaves had polytheist husbands. So people from the Sahaba, they said, yeah, they said, I can't do this. They have husbands. And then the verse came, وَالْمُحْصَنَاتِ مِنَ النِّسَاءِ إِلَّا مَا مَلَكَتْ أَيْمَانُكُمْ. And then the verse added in, like the verse was revealed that, yeah, you can have those. So it was common. I remember reading this somewhere else, that it was kind of like a Arabian culture, whatever. Yeah, you don't sleep with the slave who has a husband. Like they're already married. They're both polytheists, sure, but they're both slaves. Or like you won them over in a war or whatever, however they used to trade people. And Muhammad made it worse for slaves. And then Muslims come out here and champion him as some kind of slave-free or Malcolm X figure. What the hell are you talking about? Muhammad here, a verse was revealed conveniently when his Sahaba had better humanity than him. And they said, hey, no, we can't do that. They have husbands. And Muhammad was like, don't worry about it. Big guy upstairs says you can do it. So that's just a reminder that you should not trust scholars, not even Shabir Ally, not even if he speaks so softly, not even if he says to his own daughter, consent is not important in this situation. It is absolutely abhorrent and disgusting. And like, I need a palate cleanser after I read this stuff. This is Tafsir ibn Kathir. If you want to look it up, you know how to look it up. Yeah, and I guess that's where I'm going to try to wrap it up here. There's a bunch of comments here, and I don't really know if there's anything I can address at the moment. So what have we learned from this stream? Let's wrap it up real quick. Today we watched 5 videos by Shabir Ally. The first 4 were about the topic of interfaith marriages in Islam, where he did not answer the questions. He just kept saying some scholars say, some scholars say. He did not answer why it is one direction, not the other. Well, he kind of did. Eventually, he said it's because the kids would end up being non-Muslim, and that would reduce the number of Muslims. And he just said, eventually, just don't do it. That's the equality part of it. We don't think it's good. Don't have interfaith marriages at all because it causes issues. And yeah, he was interviewed by his daughter. That's the most difficult interview he had to go through, basically. And then we watched the video 60 seconds where he was telling his daughter to her face, yeah, consent doesn't play a role when you own the woman. And then we went over this verse that shows us how the Prophet made things worse for slaves by allowing the Sahaba that had the sense to object to it. He gave them the command, basically, no, Allah says it's fine. You can go ahead and sleep with the slaves that their husbands are polytheists. So yeah, if you want to know how compatible Islam is with the rest of the world, there you go. Of course, that doesn't mean that the Muslims that you meet today are awful people, or that they know half of this stuff, or that they intend to do any of this stuff at all. But I have to remind you, this is what their scholars are talking about, or are avoiding talking about. You should absolutely grill every single scholar you meet, every single one of them. I used to be of the opinion that no, you got to be like, you still got to be civil, but hold their feet to the fire. You don't have to be mocking. You don't have to be a jerk to them if they're being nice, even if they're saying most abhorrent things. Just hold them to their word. Have them repeat the word. Have them ask follow-up questions about it, because every one of those people, every single one, no matter how many PhDs he has, no matter how many, has some kind of cognitive blockage there. be it because of dishonesty or just an actual honest cognitive blockage. So don't be intimidated by these scholars. Even the best of them are just stumbling their way through because they cannot defend the indefensible. So I am absolutely going to make this a series. I'm going to go through a lot of these videos. You know, at the beginning I said, and I know someone's going to mock me for this, I said I don't want to make my videos about other people's videos. But I found that, first of all, I do get a lot more people engaged. Like, people have actually told me they enjoy the streams more than the videos. And I get more fulfillment from a lot of the videos that I make, except that they're more time consuming and they require a lot more research and editing and work, and even like working in the jokes and everything. It does take a lot of work and time and concentration. But the nice thing about streams is all I need to do is use my brain. All I need to do is use my brain and a very surface level of knowledge of Islam. And by that, I mean, it doesn't mean that I'm citing something out of context. It's just, I just need a little bit to pry, just a little bit, and your own mind. So, sorry, it seems like the chat, I haven't been paying attention to it and my mods are gone. I'm sorry that some people have infiltrated the chat. But the point I was trying to make is I'm going to do this again because it is absolutely necessary, not just because it is easy for me to do. It is absolutely useful and necessary. Like, I'm not doing this for free views or anything. People have already spoken about a lot of these topics, but I like to go in and listen to them. Let the Shaykh speak, let the Quran speak, and then take apart the words and listen to what's in between the lines and what's inferred and what's explicitly said and what is glossed over. So I'm going to do this again and again. I'm going to make this a series, Dissecting Apologetics. So if you want to suggest anything to me, I honestly don't know how you could do that. Maybe leave in the comments the title of the video, because I know links usually go, and not in the live chat comments, but like in the comments under the video when it gets posted. Please give me suggestions. I know there's a ton of them, and I'll eventually get to all of them, hopefully, inshallah. So I urge you to, every time you come across something like this, or just any answer by any scholar or anyone in life, to think about yourself before you come to a conclusion. Don't look at how many commenters are clapping on for how eloquent this sheikh is. Just think for yourself. You're not stupid. And when people tell you, when people gatekeep Islam by saying you need to know more so you can ask that question, no, you don't. You can ask the question, go to the people who know, listen to the answer, and then ask another question about the answer if it wasn't satisfactory. So please, all I'm trying to do is teach you how to think critically and think for yourself. Thank you so much for watching today. And I would do an outro, but I actually forgot where I put it. So I just want to thank everyone who's been supporting me, and people who've made it today in the stream, and everyone else. And people, I don't utter those words, honestly. That's why I have the outro. That's why I just mentions it in passing. But thank you to my patrons. And I really appreciate all the support that I get, even without any monetary support. And speak of the devil. Thank you, Zach Rose. Thank you, everybody. And as always, think critically, think for yourself.